Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another incredible installment of the Arcane Archive presents MetaTalks. You have, of course, joined here today by your illustrious, enigmatic hosts, Adam
and Sam.
Here to provide you with another amazing MetaTalk topic. Today, Sammy, as always, tell the people, what are we MetaTalk talking about today?
We chose a very fun, not at all controversial topic today.
As we always
something
do.
Something I think close to a lot of hearts of people who play this game regularly. It is what we consider the problem DM, problem player. Let's be real. It's people we play with that we'd rather things go differently.
It can vary depending.
Yeah,
from maybe a person who might be a little bit too overly enthusiastic about certain aspects of the game, and as such might kind of disregard other people's feelings or involvement, to being just straight up those guys, right?
Yeah.
And we all know the guys that we're talking about when we say those guys. They are unfortunately a staple in the TTRPG community in any game that you play.
I mean, let's be real. Anything, you find something you like to do in a group, there's always going to be enough people in that interest that you're not going to get along with. Now, whether that's a difference of opinion, whether that's genuinely people being not great human beings, there's a wide berth of what we're going to kind of touch on today.
There absolutely is. And we're gonna go through a number of different kind of archetypes or situations, scenarios, and we're gonna do our best to maybe give you a little bit of tips, tricks, suggestions. Again, all based on disclaimer, all based on our personal kind of experiences, thoughts, and feelings on how maybe to best approach, remedy, or maybe just outright, handle the situation if it needs to be handled.
Both of us have, I feel like, been in this hobby long enough that we've encountered different variations of this issue, whether that's something that's genuinely keeping people from enjoying or playing a game, to just things that as a person sometimes you need to get off your chest towards the people that you're playing with. We both had very different experiences in this kind of area, and so both of us are going to have kind of different stories, different opinions, different perspectives of how this all works. I think I can speak for both of us in saying we're going to try to leave maybe the worst details out of some of the stuff. I know some people don't like hearing about some truly terrible things.
I think primarily we want to try and keep, we discussed this a little bit beforehand, we want to try and keep the nature or vibe of this particular episode majorly positive in terms of we're not trying to necessarily attack or beat down on a dead horse about this thing. Me and Sammy, we at this point I feel like if it hasn't been already conveyed, are rather passionate about this hobby, about this experience, and we want people who are also passionate about this to be able to have a good time and to be able to enjoy it when they have the time, because it takes a lot of prep, planning, and consistent execution to be able to enjoy this hobby to its fullest extent. And obviously we want to try and do our best to provide certain contingencies in place for any little bits or pieces and unfortunate conflicts that might arise that might dampen the fun for people. And so with that being said, though, I know for a fact, Sammy, you said to me earlier that you maybe have had something a little bit recently happen that you felt was a bit frustrating or a bit, that feeling. So go ahead, please.
It is, and I think this is by far not the worst issue to have. At every table, every D&D group, every TTRPG game that you're going to play, every player is going to be different. You're going to have people that are more involved. You're going to have people that are more sitting in the back, that are less involved. You're going to have people who are there for heavy role play. You're going to have people who are there for heavy combat. There's different things that everybody gets out of this game. Now, talking to me, with me and Adam, we've obviously, with the stuff that we've talked about before, it's very evident that both of us like all sides of the equation. Exploration, role play, combat, the three pillars of the game we love so much. Now, some people, they like the idea of a TTRPG, of D&D, things like that. And they can get behind certain parts of it, whether that's hanging out with people, like, they've played with the same group, they love the group that they're with, but maybe they're not as enthusiastic in some of the other departments, whether that's a personality thing, whether they're embarrassed, whether they don't have the attention span, whatever it is, right? This is obviously, from my point of view, I've been playing with the same two groups of people for a very long time. 7 and 4 years at this point. It's a long time to hitch yourself to a wagon and see where it goes. Now, these are people who I'm friends with outside of the table. I love very much. I spend a lot of time with them outside of just playing D&D. The reality is that you're going to, even people you care about, you're going to disagree with their play styles.
Oh yeah.
You're going to have problems with certain things they do at the table or things that they don't do at the table. And I'm gonna tell a quick anecdote of what has happened recently in one of my D&D campaigns, because I think it's a very eye-opening and very out on the table example of how to approach things like this. One of my DMs, he has a full-time job. He teaches children. That's what he does. He spends a lot of time doing it. It's, that's a full career. Now, he is also our DM once every week, or now it's every 2 weeks. At first, when COVID started, we used to play in person, then we had to go online. It was this whole thing of like, hey, we're going to try this out. It worked pretty well. We didn't play like a handwritten campaign. We played a module so that, he didn't feel slighted if people weren't as into it because it was over a screen or, things like that. He put himself in a good position. Now, we started doing a completely homebrew campaign from this gentleman who put in a lot of time, wrote out a bunch of stuff. He had us all do character questionnaires so that he could include us.
9 yards.
He included us in the story in a just a very professional, very well received way from pretty much all of us.
That's amazing. That is so rare in my opinion.
It's not easy to do.
It's
now what comes with that territory is when you show up at that table, you best be ready to interact. Because you have put in the effort of writing your character. He has put in the effort of making your character a staple in this story. Now,
I just want to say real quick too, like as a bit of an aside to this, like this is a great example of when you are in a campaign, specifically like this, like Sam just described. It is, by all accounts, it is a literal commitment that you are making here and now. Like again, this person is choosing to all these people are choosing to literally provide and pay their time to engage and to interact and to have this experience with you and everyone else at the table here. Mm-hmm. And so when this particular individual as well put all this time, effort, and energy into like crafting, fabricating, and cultivating this world, this narrative, these things, it is only, at least in mine, I think Sam would agree, like our opinion, that you be ready, like he said, to be there, be present, be engaged in this activity that we have all seemingly chosen to participate. Apologies for taking a Sam. Go right ahead.
You said exactly one of the things I was going to touch on, and it's this concept. I think when you play a video game, there is no commitment, right? You're reading something on the screen, you do it, or you mess with it.
It's already,
and that's acceptable. Someone already did this. You're not looking at this person face to face. It's not a week by week or 2 week basis or month basis.
Yeah, it's not being
whatever you play on. But the reality is that at the very least, you commit to playing the character you brought to the table. I'm not saying that every day has to be your best. It doesn't. I'm not saying you have to go out of your way to be exorbitantly out there. You don't. The reality is that, at least from my point of view, the expectation I have is, at minimum, attempt role play. Attempt making this character seem real in the universe that you're in. And I can say confidently, most of our group was okay with that. At least half of us were full on in the role play. And the issue that I have had going forward from this, we're now not playing that campaign anymore. He had too many things going on in his work life to commit to it at this time.
Yeah.
So we went back to a module, and which is fine. I like the group. I like playing with him. He's a good DM. So I was like, all right, I'll make a new character. We'll play a module. We're playing Dragon Heist right now. Our first session was terrible. And by no fault of his own, he dropped us in a sandbox. He told us beforehand it is a sandbox, and 3 out of the 6 of us actually roleplayed. Now, if you know anything about D&D or tabletop RPGs, there is this whole consensus about group sizes. My opinion, 4, best group size. Some people say 3 is the best group size. We are at a group of 7 people total, including the DM, so 6 players. It's very hard to play a game when half of the people playing the game are not on top of roleplay, on top of decision making, because people think that, oh well, role play is just acting. It's not. It's also driving decision making in a game is role play. Making choices as a group is role play. Things that you do in a video game that you don't think anything of because you're the only one playing it, that's role play. That has to do with it. And there's something like, we've both been playing Baldur's Gate. You have not touched the multiplayer stuff. I have. Something I've noticed is that when you get 4 people playing a game like that, and then someone goes, so what do we do next? And then no one puts anything forward, it's very frustrating. I mean, and that's how this is. No one person controls where the group goes. And so having a group where half of you are in it, you're role playing, you're in character the whole time, you're taking notes, you're having a great time, and then 3 other people or half of your party is just kind of twiddling their thumbs and sitting off to the side because maybe this isn't the part of the game that they enjoy, is problematic. Now,
sure,
it's frustrating as the people who are putting in the effort.
I would say, yeah, I can see that. I can understand that particular stance.
It takes all the wind out of your sails. Now, my DM did the smart thing, and the next week we went to play, which was 2 weeks later. Before we even started playing, he was like, all right, we need to sit for a second and have a conversation. And he went, hey, yeah, go for it.
Before you continue, real quick, apologies. I'm curious just to hear, maybe as well as the audience wants to hear, like, can you give maybe an example real quick on how like you guys would be engaging kind of role play, and then they would not be kind of
I'll give you a great example. So we would do something. There'd be like some sort of like we'd have a hook. Let's say we have a hook in a campaign. Mm-hmm. You have to go here to do this, or go talk to this person. And when we would go talk to this person, there's only 3 people out of the 6 that'll interact, right? And then when the conversation's over and we all have the information, my DM's like, okay, well, what do you want to do from here? And 3 of us would be like, well, this is what we want to do. And that might be 3 different answers. All 3 of us want to do something different, right? And the 3 other people, he'd be like, okay, what do you guys want to do? And it's crickets. Or it's like
they wouldn't respond.
It was more like, or they'd just be like, oh, that's okay. Oh, we'll just do that. Like but there was no.
Okay. I can, no.
The reality is, right, is when you have different levels of interest in something, it can cause friction. Yeah. And
I kind of see what you're saying.
Like, again, like I love these people, and like I have been pushing them to be more in it. And as a player, I'd love to be a DM. I'm really not that great at it. I'm very much more of a what is it? A DM's pet is the best way to put it. I know the rules. I know how to play the game, but I love being
you're a DM assistant. You're like
kind of, and it's not the greatest because sometimes I definitely overstep my boundaries a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
But it comes from a place of wanting to help.
Absolutely.
But I get shit when someone tries to do something and I remind the DM that that's not how it goes. Rules is written, and they look at it and they're like, "Yeah, sorry," and they're all like, "Fuck you, Sam." And I'm like, okay, well, I want to play the game the way that I feel like we've all agreed to play it. But and that's my problem. I'm a problem player in my own way. But the reality is that I, as a player, try to include everyone in my role play. Every time I talk about something, I will always try to include someone else, even if they're not normally role-playing, because I want them to be a part of the story. And that's the whole point. We're writing a story. And so for me, it's very frustrating when I'm trying to include other people and they don't. There's no response, and
they're
so
not reciprocating
it
that
equally.
intention.
I mean, it upset our DM. Now he's not a child, so he didn't scream and cry like a child.
No.
But what he did was the next time we played 2 weeks later, we were in the Discord and he's like, "All right, we're not playing yet." Everyone's like, "What do you mean?" Now 3 of us already knew what was going on because we had already been complaining to each other about this issue. And he was like, "All right, this is the deal. We're playing a open world. It's very sandbox. Like you guys have to make the choices." He's like, "I can't force you to do anything. There is no railroad to bring you across." He's like, "Our first campaign was like the Dragon Heist, all that. Not Dragon Heist.
Tyranny of Dragons.
Tyranny of Dragons. That whole book series, the 2 books or 3 books, whatever it was.
It's all railroad.
It is railroad. It is 100% railroad. Now, for a first campaign, that's fine. Because like now you have something in front of you that you're like, this is what we have to do. And as a group,
active, you're moving.
we all feel that way. But in something like Waterdeep Dragon Heist, you could have people who have a different opinion. And they're like, no, we don't want to do that. But there was nothing of that. It was still like very like, well.
How are these 3 players like how have they experienced any kind of other campaigns that would be more sandbox like and instead of not being more railroad heavy?
So,
or is this their first kind of introduction to a more
technically we all played Curse of Strahd, which is sandbox.
Yeah,
Curse of Strahd is sandbox.
Yeah,
and we also, some of us, one of the players in that campaign that is less roleplay did play in Tomb of Annihilation, which is also full sandbox.
And were they more involved and active in those?
No. Okay. So that's the thing is I feel like, at least from what I've said and what I've had the discussions, is that we've been doing this long enough that like maybe before we kind of put it to the side and we're like, okay, you play how you want to play. That's okay. You still show up. You're still nice. We still like you. We're all good. But it's getting to a point now where not only have we done like a very homebrew roleplay game where people were starting to get more involved. They were like just on the cusp, right? Where like I could get them involved in some stuff, but they weren't as involved. Yeah. But now it's like, can we, like, we've been doing this long enough that like you've seen us do it.
What parts of the game are they much more like gung-ho involved with? Combat, exploration,
I'd say everyone
building, like character building?
It's really so I'd say combat, everyone pays attention just fine.
Okay.
One of them is not great at combat or roleplay or anything, but likes being there. And they're great. They're a good person. Like, I don't want them to leave. Not at all. I want them to keep playing because I think they're just shy.
Okay.
It's the kind of thing like they've been with us since the beginning, which not everybody has. People have left and come back. Like they've showed
their commitment and that they want to be there. And
they're there every week. And it's one of those things where like the whole, one of the things that was brought up was like, I get it if you want to be here every week, but if you're not going to be here every week and participate, do you really want to be here, or are you just hanging out?
That is a fair. And
that was what our DM kind of said to us. And he was like, look, this is not going to work unless you guys
participate.
Yeah. And I think, some of us, the 3 of us that have not been an issue with role playing, we kind of disagree and agree on certain points of, yes, they're doing better. No, they're really not. There's nothing changed. But he said his piece, and we hope things can change. The reality is that like I'll still show up. I'll still do my best to include everybody in whatever's going on. But it's one of those things is like, how do you handle things like that? How do you bring that up to people in a way that's not criticizing, in a way that's rude? And I think my DM is a good example of that. He said, hey, I love you all, but this is what I want from this. And like, we've been doing it for long enough that I don't think it's a bad ask. I've put in all this effort. Can we try to get closer to where I want to be?
All right.
I will say there's a cool thing about stuff like this. Don't single people out. Not at first.
Not a great idea, especially.
No, and because the people who aren't a problem, they'll know based on what you're saying, they'll know like, oh, I just keep doing what I'm doing.
I mean,
As
I will
oriented.
say that it's like, it's probably a good idea maybe to touch upon again the concerns that the majority or a part of the group or whatever that is engaging in the group, basically to bring those up in terms of like, I absolutely agree. I think your GM handled that phenomenally in terms of just being, again, just, and as we always say here at the Arcane Archive, communication, clear, honest communication. And again, not, we say honest, but you don't have to be a jerk about it. Just clear, respectful, honest communication really is the cornerstone to make campaigns last and better and healthy. And the way your GM handled it, just basically being like you said, like he before you started the session, he was like, okay, I just want to take a second real quick to talk about kind of my feelings and thoughts, because again, I feel like there can be a lot of situations and moments where people, especially players, can tend to take for granted the work and the effort that their GM puts into this, because they're not always privy to all the stuff that goes into it over the weeks or months or even years maybe that have gone into like this world, this campaign, and this whole thing. And it's the same thing with any kind of relationship, right? Like any relationships that you're in, whether you're, married, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, like just even friendship, like even family members, right? Even family members who love and care for each other are, in fact, there's a whole staple about how they can still get angry and annoyed and frustrated with each other and how you're doing. Like usually if you live with a person and you spend time with a person, again, you love and care for them, you have a great time with them, but that even in and of itself makes it easier to feel a little bit more frustrated and annoyed or aggravated when they're doing certain things that you're like, hey, this is kind of what we're wanting to get from this, and it feels like you're not putting in that effort that I'm still putting into this thing.
It's one of those things where you talk about like, well, respect the DM and what the work they put in, but in my opinion, you also have to equally respect the people who are willing to show up and give themselves to a campaign, whether that's full. I mean, I'm talking about like full character roleplay, because that's not easy for everyone. Even people that are good at it, it's not easy. It's draining. It takes a lot of thought. It takes a lot of commitment. And so if you're at a table, you have to look at the people around you. What are they putting into this? And can you say the same? I'm not saying you have to be good. That's the thing I think people get hung up on in roleplay, because that's what I got hung up on when I first started.
I agree. A lot of people,
you don't have to be good at it. You just have to try.
I mean, well, and that's the thing, right? Being good at it can be highly subjective, right?
It is.
In terms of like let's maybe take a moment to try and maybe clarify what would be considered so-called good roleplay in D&D. Now, good roleplay in D&D, at least in my opinion, and I think maybe you might agree, Sammy, is it's not about how well you can do like an accent.
Nope.
Or maybe even how in-depth your backstory is, like how much you wrote out. It is specifically your zeal and your commitment to engaging in the world and your fellow players as much as you can. Like it is the level of your engagement, and even if, for instance, like you wrote like a single page backstory, not even the full page, like you just literally wrote like, hey, my character is somebody who like really loves sweets or whatever, and you just role played like that being a thing where it's like maybe your character is like a super like big tough like edgy like dragonborn who fighter who's just been messed up, gone through war, and he loves sweets. That's like the one little light that he has, and you role play that little thing with
I think about those
world.
I think about those giant bodybuilders who their dog is their girlfriend's dog, and it's a little chihuahua, but they walk around and they love it.
They love
it.
They're just big giant bears
because they're people.
Exactly. They're multifaceted. They're not just their muscles. They're not just their body. They also have this other aspect to them. And again, that's roleplay. Is roleplay, and that is also good roleplay where you can show and again, what I would suggest maybe for any people who might be struggling with that is this is a character that came from you.
Yeah.
You utilize aspects of yourself. That is
Yes.
the easiest way
Yes.
to be able to not only be like to not only provide just depth to your character, but also to provide you reason to be engaged and involved and interested, because these are aspects and parts of you. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say, like, don't necessarily just make your character a carbon copy of you from head to toe, like dropping yourself in there. That maybe wouldn't be the best route to go, because that can then lead to, like, depending on how your character acts or how other people's character acts with you, we're all attached to our characters for sure. Despite what Sam might claim, he says that he's not, but he actually is. Don't let him fool you. You do want to avoid as best as you can by taking certain things in game personally, necessarily. Like, that is important. There does still need to be a certain amount of separation.
Yes.
But only to the extent of, like, again, if you're in a group, these should be people that you should trust, right? Like, these are people, like, and I'm saying this basically on your experience, Sam.
Yeah,
where
my
you
experience
with
is a little
these
bit different,
people, with a lot of people, a lot of time. Like, if this is a new game, even more so, you should refrain from, like, dropping just yourself completely into a game. Like, Heart, for sure, you should be like, yo, take parts of yourself. What do you like? Do you like sweets? Do you like reading? Do you like music? Do you like exercising? Take those parts and bits of yourself, not parts of you that those are by no means like everything that you are, but they're parts of you, and place them there, attach them to your character, and be like, you know what, I can act that out because that is something that I personally enjoy, and that gives me incentive and fuel to be able to truly role play and engage and then interact in the world itself, to immerse yourself and show that you are present and engaged and committed. Specifically to another aspect as well, I think, is to Sam's point, like, really quickly, Sam, like, how did the other players kind of react when your GM kind of presented this and kind of like had this?
There was acknowledgement, I think. Everyone acknowledged it, even the ones of us who don't have these problems. We all said, yeah, that's something we want to do. We want to be part of this. And because he was basically like, look, if I can't get the reciprocation, like, why am I doing this? We've been doing this for a long time, and if I can't get that from you guys, it's very hard for me to continue. And I think there was acknowledgement, but the session immediately after, I don't think there was so much of a difference. I think maybe a modicum, but it's one of those things where I don't expect people to change overnight.
No.
And it's hard because I think people, again, as we just said, people look at role play differently than from person to person.
And just the game itself, like we always say, like, and like Sam prefaced literally, at the top, is everyone plays this game differently. Even those who have very similar, like, goals, desires, and who benefit, who get the same benefits, even they still play the game slightly differently from each other. And so, like you said, like, it seems potentially like these particular players, they get most out of the more combat number crunchy side of the game, rather than the more, like,
I think it's more about the successes. So
that hit of dopamine when you succeed on, like, a check,
if we walk into a fight and we get through it, I think that's where it's survival. I think that's where they get their kick from.
Or even,
I think
it's like that gambling hit. Again, that gambling dopamine where
we're successful. Oh crap, we're successful. Like, that's a big deal.
You got things, and you got loot, you got experience, you got, you succeeded in this attempt that you're doing.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, do these players, do they like to roll the dice? Like, do they like dice checks? Do they like to be able to utilize their abilities, maybe, if they're...
Well, I think at least two of them, the one that is kind of just there, I don't know if it's really that important to them. They always play either ranger or rogue. That's just what they're comfortable with.
Do they do a lot of skill checks then? Do they like to again
No,
use
when they're
their
asked,
that they
but
don't they don't they
they don't
don't
offer up.
seek it out. They don't
No,
like okay.
usually what happens is they play someone who's good at, say, breaking into something or opening a chest or whatever it is, and when we come across something, we'll always be like, all right, like, do you want to give it a go? And they're happy to do it. They're
But
happy to be a part of that.
they
They're
don't take the
happy.
initiative
No,
though to okay.
no,
Do they like to scout ahead of the party to like get information? Do they okay?
nope. More often than not, what I'll do as a player is if we're in travel, I'll be like, hey, I would like to do this, and I think so and so would be a good partner for that. And I'll ask them in character. I'm like, do you want to go do this? Or I'll try to push them towards things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
But they don't I don't think if I ever asked them, they would ever say anything.
Interesting.
And it's hard because
Yeah.
they'll do it, but only if you
Very passively so though. It's a very they are the kind of the epitome of passive in that
I
they
think
are not actively
the other two pay attention in combat. They are there for combat. Both of them look at what they have. They make they make strategic choices.
they like
They
that for that
always
action. They like to be
well they ask like they'll ask if like, hey, this is what I'm thinking of, like how do y'all feel, like they'll try to beseech the group on their decision making, in a very cooperative way. Now I'm obviously, to me that's metagaming, so I don't do
I was
that.
gonna say that might be a little borderline metagaming.
It's borderline,
Like
but I think that's also like it's a team strategy
but it is
kind of thing.
I also I don't necessarily in that particular vein I wouldn't necessarily demonize players for doing it. Maybe for your group since you guys have been together for so long I would probably be less inclined to allow that kind of thing in terms of like
Oh,
hey
I don't do it. I just do what I think is the right thing to do, and then when people
yeah
after me go, I'm
I mean
like,
but
well,
obviously if it's within the context of like it's like hey your group knows what each other's abilities are. You would know kind of this thing in terms of
yeah,
like what this will affect will have yada yada yada. But in terms of being like, hey, you guys think it's like well, do what do what you're gonna do.
that's what I would say.
Because
Which they
unless you
hate.
have like unless you have like unless you're
They
shouting this
hate.
out or unless you're and I get that and I do respect the fact that they are trying again like you said they're trying to be team players, they're trying to not maybe offend or to cross or step on anybody's toes, which is it is definitely I think a positive thing to keep that consideration in mind. But obviously, at the same token, it is a matter of like, hey, at the end of the day, and kind of harkening back to what you said before, is like you do have to make a decision. Like we cannot make the decisions for you. This isn't like again, like you said, a video game where we're in control of all the other characters and decide their actions and what they're going to do. Like you are an
Yeah.
individual and you are an equal individual in this group, and you might not necessarily have all the information necessary to be like, is this the best course of
No,
action? It's like,
that's one of my favorite parts of the game is not every character is going to understand what's going on. You're playing a barbarian who's never traveled with people who do magic, who's never done this, who's never done that, and you've walked into a fight with a bunch of wizards. You don't know what's going on. So when I played a barbarian, my first instinct is that guy right there is doing something. And it doesn't seem like my party likes that very much. I'm gonna go fuck his ass up.
yeah.
Like that's again, that's kind of that character, playing a character. It all comes back to that. It's like
yeah.
if y'all were playing specifically to a character and what a character would do, you don't have to ask us what to do. And that's kind of where that lies for me is
Well, to be fair, you're also far more abrasive and confident in terms of like you're gonna even just in normal real life, Sam. Like you're like, yo, this is me. This is where I'm as what I'm doing. Everyone else can fuck off as far as I'm concerned.
Sometimes
love you, like respectfully. But it's but it's and that's one of the things that I love about you, and that's one of the things I think you and I relate on too, is that I can be like that too in a lot of ways. And like it's like, yo, this is what's happening. Sorry, not sorry. Again, nothing personal. I don't mean to offend or harm anybody, but this is just how I am. This is who I am. This is what I would do. In regards,
but it's that
to
effort
like,
of teaching
sure.
that moment of like, all right, It's your turn. What do you do? Well, I have to think to myself, and I do this very quickly as a player. I'm like, well, what would my character would do? That's the first thing I ask myself. What would my character do? Now, that has to come from somewhere. I think a lot of people forget. And I'm not saying you need to have a 10-page backstory. Dude, I cheat on backstory. This is what I do. I have a questionnaire that we used like 4 years ago. That's what we've been using.
And you just reference that.
I fill it out, right, of the character.
Mhm.
My first session, if I do something different than that sheet says, that sheet's edited. Because you don't know how a character's going to be until you play them with a group.
A lot of the time, no character survives contact with the actual like session 1.
No,
like,
and so to me, session 0 and then session 1 are the two most important sessions in a D&D campaign, because the first session is your idea. Session 0 is your idea of what a character is supposed to be.
Yeah, is the execution. And
session 1 is actually real play of the character you thought they were going to be.
Yep.
Now, the moment you come in contact with something, you make a different decision. You got to think to yourself, hey, maybe I screwed that up a little bit, but it's not unsavable. What can I still keep as my tenets? I love that. I love using this. There's a reason why every D&D sheet has flaws, bonds, and whatever the hell the other one is. I can't. Is there an enemies one, or is it just flaws and bonds?
It's flaws, bonds, and like
connections or ideals or something.
Ideals.
Yeah,
it's like ideals, flaws, bonds, and like I think characteristics, something like that.
Yeah, you have your background.
4 of them.
Yeah,
so it's like so
for me,
like your personality traits.
You write out basic stuff about your character. Who are your parents? Who have you met that's important to you? What do you value most of the time? What's your most important value as a person? What do you hate? What's the thing that'll set you off no matter what? What do you love? Like we're talking extremely basic things here. Now you write all that out. You think, oh, this is great. Then you play a game and you realize this doesn't hold up at all. Like there are parts of this that just don't hold up. You know what? Edit them, change them, make them, because people are not a set of bullet points.
Let's
people are amalgamous. They change. They grow.
Absolutely, they're multifaceted in many ways,
So,
as we said before.
If you have a couple of things that you wrote down that you're like, you know what, I like this part of my character, but this is too much, change it, right? And then second session, that's where your character truly shines. Now, what the reason
it maybe should also be stated too is your character can still indeed grow
100%.
and change throughout an entire campaign.
Yeah,
like who that character was at like session 1 and then session 2, when you get to like session 30, if you're lucky, you know, like that character can then maybe become someone entirely different depending too on their experiences. That is also okay. That is also a thing that naturally happens in the real world too. People grow, they shift, they morph, they can change in certain ways.
I think that's the hardest part for a lot of people, is actually growing.
Oh yeah, are you kidding me? That is the hardest part in every area.
Everything, even in real life, and
specifically in real life. Even.
I think for me, role playing comes down to the fact of you have to weigh a lot of the things you do in real time, and it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that and make the right choice and feel good about it all the time. And sometimes it's not going to feel good. But what I will say is I'd rather people go out there and try anyway, because if you make the wrong decision and you don't like it and it leaves you with a sour taste, whatever it is, guess what? You have people that are sitting next to you and someone behind a screen that after a game you could talk about it and be like, hey, I didn't like this. I really didn't like this. It made me feel bad. I felt soured. Can we do something about this? And I will guarantee you that anyone who's
worth their salt,
anyone you've hitched yourself to where you're like, I want to put effort into this, will respect that, because you know what you're doing? You're respecting their effort. That is the key. It's mutual respect. It's what we've said from the beginning of this. Every time we've done an episode of this, it always ends up back at respect. And mutual respect at that, and being clear and communicative. Yeah. And so that's the reality.
Here's one thing I do want to touch upon though on this particular topic too. Like let's take it to the other dichotomy, right? Because again, this episode is kind of more about, you know, problems that can occur inside a campaign. whether it be a problematic GM, a problematic player, problematic whatever. That, to your point, in terms of like you used a phrase known as, what would your character do? That is, and for anyone who might not be as in the know in the community of TTRPGs and as a whole, that is a very
loaded phrase,
loaded taboo almost phrase of people will often, who are considered problematic players, will utilize that phrase as almost an excuse for their behavior. Like, so again, in reference to like your friends who are asking, like, is this okay? Do you guys think this would be a good idea? Again, that can be problematic in a sense on like, like, hey, have confidence, take ownership of your character, of the situation, like do what you're gonna do. And I feel like you can say that to them specifically because like, look, we trust that you do not have any bad intentions.
Yeah.
Like you are not
that's not even really problematic to me.
Mess anything up.
Because you're trying to be considerate of the other people at your table.
Exactly. And so it's like,
that's where that comes from.
There is such a thing as being maybe too overly considerate at times.
Oh yeah. But that's the least of my problems.
But that's that is the least issue, especially again, and I say this as a specific kind of example of on the other side of things, there are absolutely those types of people who will just do whatever, and even with like the deliberate like desire to screw shit up for their party, to be completely disregarding and completely discourteous to your party members. Like literally, I had just been a part of or a new group that I had just joined recently. Like the GM told me that there's maybe a bit of a problem player in it that they've had, and basically where it's like this guy who just, and I think it's his first ever time playing D&D apparently, and so that's the GM's kind of trying to be like understanding and a little bit like more merciful in a sense to his actions because okay, it's his first time, he's learning, we're giving him the benefit of the doubt, right?
Yeah, let's not go
this particular person, like this player, he's on like his third character now because his other two characters have died because he's been doing things that have just kind of been like to the point we were making before. They don't really make sense within the confines of the characters that he made in terms of their actions. They're just kind of murder hoboy. Like they just go and start trying to like attack or kill people at random in like, in towns where it's just like, why though? Like, because I'm bored and I want to do this thing. And it's like, that's not, and this GM, like he specifically just stays like, it's like, look, if your character had maybe a more legitimate reason for why he's doing what he's doing, like maybe he's like, if you want to tell me he was maybe like a paladin or a worshiper of some dark god of murder or whatever.
Yeah,
and
makes
like
sense.
he's going to try and like, he wants to kill a person, or maybe if he's like a vampire who has to like kill and feed every once in a while in order to do that thing, it's like, okay, that at least provides some context and reason for why your character might be doing this. But if you're literally just like a paladin or cleric of like a lawful good deity who likes to preserve life, and you're like, I'm gonna go and kill this person, it's like that's you're just throwing a wrench into things because you can. Like you're trying to play the game like a video game, like we said before, like it's like Skyrim or even kind of Baldur's Gate, where it's like you can't really do that in D&D. That doesn't help push a narrative, and it's like people will use the excuse like, well, that's what my character would do. I created my character. It's like, well, no, it's not. That doesn't make sense.
I definitely use that phrase too liberally in the way that I explain things.
I think
now I, in my experience, I don't mess up a campaign for fun. So when I say my character would do that, I am being genuine in the sense of like,
I agree.
You have interacted with my character for 6 months now. You damn well know that's what I would do.
Yeah.
And if you disagree with me, let's talk it out. I'm definitely more on the lines of let's have a conversation if you don't like what I'm doing. I would say
that's better, especially again if you've been journeying for 6 months. This character who might have some issues with what your character is doing. It's like, okay, well, your character and this character, they're close. They have been through thick and thin. This character is probably open to maybe being, influenced by this character to hear out what the same.
That's the best.
My character's gonna kill this person out of anger. It's like, okay, wait a minute. You don't have to do that. All right. This is maybe not necessarily the actually most helpful or productive route to go here.
Yeah.
And basically, it'd be like, okay, you talk them down, and while your character might initially, if they were by themselves, they might act in a much more violent manner initially, but due to the fact that this character here is interacting with them, and you have been together for a while, you have affection and connection and camaraderie. You're like, okay, you know what? This is again one of those great moments where your character can change. They can grow. They can shift. They don't have to be stagnant at that same spot they were, again, 30 sessions ago.
Yeah, I think a wonderful way to put something forward as well is, I understand there are some people out there who they like building problematic characters. They like to build like that sneaky rogue who does messed up shit. That's their whole character ideal. And like you're in a normal campaign, but you're like, I want to find horrible things and do horrible things. I don't want people to notice, or I want to get away with these things. Now, let's be real. I've built characters that are definitely towing the line.
Oh yeah, one of your favorites, as a matter of fact.
Of good and maybe not quite so good.
A bit
I wouldn't
trollish.
No, I don't like to put myself that far. I don't think I'm trollish.
Fair enough.
But the reality is that in a group of characters, you are going to have two ends of the spectrum on what people are okay with, right? I'm not talking about the people like at the table. I'm talking about the characters you are playing. And so I think that there's a really good, I have a good example of this. I think is the right way to do this, as opposed to then what we're going to talk about, which is the wrong way to handle this. My current character in one of my campaigns is a vengeful, angry, violent human being. We are in a party with a very good aligned, who is now revealed to be a ancient silver dragon who lost their memory, who is a player character who has a human form. There's limits on that, obviously, but is a paladin of Bahamut. Is a silver dragon. The Silver King is his actual title. But the reality is that we have come in contact with the dragon cults and prisoners. And the first time that the both of us were in the same room encountering a prisoner, I tortured them to death to get information. Now, at the time, he didn't have his memories, but he still had a sense of justice, and he let it slide. There was no conversation. There was no stopping me. But I knew as myself, I knew his character definitely had a problem with it, just based off what I knew about this character. Mm-hmm. Even though we as characters didn't know each other for a very long time. We had a party split at one point, and I had to leave the campaign for a while, and I came back as this character at a certain time, and I knew of him, but I didn't really know about him. Second time we had this similar thing happen where we captured somebody. I went to go do my normal thing, and I was told off. I was stopped, both attempted physical and as well as just through dialogue. Mm-hmm. He was like, yeah, we're not doing this. And it got like, there was an argument. It turned into an in-character yelling match. Like, again, nothing personal. That's another huge issue here. You can't take this thing's personal. It ended up like my DM had a DMPC who followed me out. We had this big conversation. It took a while, and I ended up back there and explained myself to the rest of the people. And it was one of those things where like, we are now aware of each other. We're on different sides of the spectrum. And if we left each of us alone, we might make different choices. But because we have to work together, there is a middle ground. There is a compromise. And I think a lot of people who build these characters who are like, well, I want to do all these messed up things. You still are agreeing to play at a table in a party. And I think that is the main issue with a lot of the people who do this, is that the party, this concept of party, should be first and foremost the most important part of why you're building a character. Because without that, this doesn't work. That's why D&D is structured the way it is. That's why party conflict and rests and all of these mechanics in a lot of TTRPGs are based on the group, is because it does not work if you're not ready to be in a group. So if you're a murderous psychopath, you're a side character. If you're doing like a one session, like I'll be here for a session and then I'm gone, do whatever you want.
Or a one shot or whatever.
But like the reality is, like, when throughout the 6 years I've been playing with this group, 6-7 years, we've had people who were interested in playing D&D but could not commit to a full campaign, so they came in for like 1 or 2 sessions.
Okay.
And most of them are chaotic as fuck.
Yeah, guest characters, yeah.
Yeah, they're guest characters and they're chaotic and they mess things up and then they're gone. Now, the only reason I'm not mad about that is because that's kind of what you want.
That's
you
the
want
essence or theme.
That's the essence of a guest character, is that they should influence something happening in that session, and they're gone. Now, when I did a guest character, I was not chaotic. I was very a stoic, supporting cast. Like, we need to do this. I'm here for you all, and I ended up getting myself killed to save these people. Now, that's a completely different area of, like, I'm going to be a chaotic douchebag, but that's okay. I think being a chaotic person as a guest character is great, but if you're going to commit to being in a party and being in a group for a long period of time, there are upper and lower limits. We've talked about the chaotic stupid, where you just want to cause problems for no reason. We've also talked about the lawful stupid, where there is no gray area. There is no room for difference from me. I am an uncompromising force of justice. That's not how anyone is in the real world. And if there is someone like that, your DM owns that character. And if you make a player character that becomes that person, give them to your DM. I know it sounds weird. It sounds strange. But there is a point where I think some people don't look at the character that they've created.
Well, they look at them again from a very mechanical, ironic, like meta point of view, where it's just like, my character is just the sum total of this particular characteristic that I've made for them, that they are just uncompromised, or they look at, the alignment like lawful good or whatever, and they're just like, this, they have to abide by this letter of the law absolutely uncompromisingly. And here's the thing, right? Once more, I believe we have touched upon this slightly in some other videos, and that it is okay to have characters maybe start out with those kinds of traits, but you should only do so with the explicit intention of eventually moving away from that, growing out of that much more limited, constricting way of thinking, and growing to the point of seeing, hey, you see your friends here who have fought with you through thick and thin and how they do things, and you begin to learn from them. That is a natural thing that happens in life. If you spend time with people, hell, even as, if you're a child, you naturally imprint upon people who are in your life. You pick up maybe traits from them, especially if you like them more. You begin to learn from them and begin to maybe exhibit things similarly to them. And that is a great way of evolving your character and your person. And specifically, again, touching upon this particular type of very prominent issue in the community in terms of problem players. The key issue there being is, like, there are all kinds of phrases that we use in the community, such as, they feel like they got main character syndrome, right? When you specifically, like Sam touched upon, this is a cooperative storytelling narrative game. That is the point. Emphasis on the cooperative. Like he said, this game is literally built for a group. If you want to play by yourself, go play Baldur's Gate. Go play Skyrim. Go play Divinity. Go play, like, you literally will have complete and utter control over everything in there. You can do whatever you want. You can save scum and kill and murder and whatever. Like, you can do all of that stuff as much as you want in a video game. This is not that. The whole point of this is to try your best to fabricate, to create and manifest a almost like an alternate universe that is still rooted somewhere between reality and fantasy, right? Like, it is like right in the middle of that. That is usually the point, and not always. Some people do just like to maybe mess around, have a joke, do all this stuff, and that's fine too if you want to do that, but you need to be upfront and honest about that. And if one player is like, I just want to do all this stuff, I just want to mess with everything, I just want to screw everything up, it's like, okay, then go find a different campaign for that. Because in this campaign, you have to make a character who is willing to be with the party and do things with the party, not just be so quick to screw them over for no reason whatsoever. Like, that's...
I mean, even in the books, like even in the player's handbook, it touches upon, when you make a character. I mean, I don't even know if it touches upon it in the book necessarily, but I think it's a widely accepted issue of the fact that, like, if you're going to create a character, the main hook that they need is, why are they in a party? Because very rarely does a D&D campaign start out, or a TTRPG campaign start out, where you aren't in a group, where you do like 3 sessions as a solo player. No, your first session is almost entirely in a group.
It is usually to gather the party together.
You might have different reasons you're there.
You might start out at different places,
but there is supposedly a concurrent reason why everyone's there, and you as a player need to think, why am I here?
Yeah,
what's my hook?
That is usually the biggest aspect of creating a character, right?
Yeah.
What is your reason for this character? Because the story isn't about your character, it's about the group.
Yeah.
The story is about following this group of people and doing and all the activities and shenanigans and adventures and encounters that they experience throughout this time that you are following them. That is literally what a D&D campaign is. A campaign is following this group of people, not just the one, not just whatever. And so you do have to have, like, probably the most important aspect of your character is, okay, why is he here? Because that is another thing that you hear in a lot of RPG, like horror stories and such, is being like, you know, where they'll be like, okay, well, why is your character doing this? You know, a lot of people will be like, well, my character has no reason to do that. So, like, okay,
then maybe you should have a different character.
Here? Yeah, either that, or why didn't you give him a reason then? Or why don't you give him a reason? Why don't we, as the GM and the player, try to find and figure out a reason for why your character would want to be with the party or do this thing with them? Because otherwise, you do have to have the question, like, okay, yeah, why are you here then? And if you're not willing to give your character a reason, then yeah, like Sam said, maybe make a different character, or maybe you're just not fit for the group. Maybe you're not fit to play D&D at all, if that's kind of just how you feel in a general sense.
There's different, I think there's different levels of D&D.
Absolutely.
There is high role play, high fantasy. There's also, like, beer and pretzels. Let's roll dice. Let's drink. Let's have fun.
Around. Yeah, let's screw around, you know? Like,
and that's, I think, there's a lot of people, I think, that play this game who maybe expect it to be more casual. And I think what that can do, I think, you know, as someone who puts in a lot of effort into playing the game, I think what that can do is that can definitely damage friendships. Is when someone comes in, they don't take it seriously. And it sucks, because it shouldn't, but it does, because you put in effort, and it feels like a personal slight.
It
shouldn't.
Yeah.
It shouldn't feel personal, but I've read stuff and I've talked to people where it feels personal to them.
Because it is.
And it sucks because you're putting in something. And I think that's where this problem player, problem DM things come from, as much as they do. There's the fact that you put your all into something, and then someone just fucking completely
they just
ignores
shit on it, or they disregard it, or they like it. It never feels good, no matter what, in real life, in any way, shape. It's like, okay, this is something I like, or maybe even I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
And it never feels good for somebody else to be like, oh, well, that's just dumb, or that's just garbage. Like, to disregard, to punch down, to in some way make it feel less in a way that feels like you like that. And that is a natural thing to feel, right? Where you're like, but I like that though. Why are you messing with it? Why are you saying that? I enjoy that.
And I will urge, I mean, we've talked about this before. I urge anyone who joins a campaign where your first interaction with the group is something of that nature, where it makes you feel bad or sour, leave. Because as much as I know it's hard, you know, me and Adam have had many conversations about how difficult it is to find long-term groups. I am very lucky in the sense that I have found people who I care about, who we play consistently. Now, I will say, and I think people might discount the fact, it takes a shitload of effort to continue that. It takes a lot of people who are down. That's the only reason we've stuck around. We've had our bumps. Believe me.
Oh, I'm sure.
It has been difficult. We've had times where, you know, you really have to tell people to get their ass in gear. And it's one of those things where if you join a group, whether it's online, whether it's in person, Discord, Game Store, Roll20, whatever forum you find yourself on, or in person, and your first interaction with this group is a negative one, whether that's putting you down for your character choices, whether it's making fun of you for not knowing all the rules, anything of that nature, where it's directed at you, leave. Find something else, because it's not worth the feelings you'll have just to attempt to make it work.
No.
There's something that I can say, no matter, like, all these problems I've talked about with my own playing, it has never been the answer to that problem has never been let's kick them out.
No.
The answer has always been how can we make this better for everyone, right? And I think that's why you come from this in a positive aspect, and that's what we've tried to do so far. And if you are joining something or doing something and someone's a problem, whether it's the DM or another player or all the players or just the DM, doesn't really matter. If you come to a table and their first couple interaction with you are a majority negative, you need to find a new group of people. And I know it's hard. I know it sucks because you finally found something and it just doesn't work out, and it's sour. It sucks.
It is.
I hate it. I've had my own experiences like that in life.
Man.
Might not necessarily like with D&D, but it's something that if you're passionate about, you want to try it, and that's your end result for your first game or your second game or whatever it is. It's tough. It's tough, and I feel for those who go through that.
It is, man.
But the first thing the things you have to think about in something like this, or you're putting yourself forward, is what is it going to do to me? Is it a positive experience? Is it mostly positive and there's a couple negatives? Well, I can work through that. Is it very little positive and a lot of negative, or full negative? I mean,
I think I feel like that is a good lesson to just have again in anything in life, in real life.
It's standard to everything else.
What is the what is this percentage of like the positive you're getting back as opposed to the negative that you seem to be kind of experiencing or receiving for the most part? It's like, again, is this basically just like, are you getting diminishing returns at this point on like, because a huge, again, I'm going to reference another very common used term in the community, and that's no D&D is better than bad D&D, right? Like that is, bad. Everyone uses it, everyone says it, and because it's one of the most true adages that you'll hear. Bad D&D is going to be like exceedingly more detrimental to you, your mental health, your life, all that stuff, than having no D&D at the time, right?
Yeah.
You might not have any D&D, but it's certainly a better state and position for you to be in, just kind of all around, than having bad D&D. And bad D&D can be anything from, excuse me, the GM is actively like emotionally abusing you or trying to like, take advantage of you, to even just to you maybe just not having a good time.
Yeah.
Maybe you're just not really jiving or vibing and fitting in with this particular group. It's not really the campaign for you. And that's okay. It's okay to be like, you know what? I really want to play. I want to do this, but this is not the experience that I really probably should be having. This is not the experience that I need to be having in this. So I'm gonna step away. I'm gonna take a step away. I'm gonna just reassess. And like Sam said, we know how hard that can be when it's just like, because it's hard to find. Like, take it from me. I have like for so long could not find a single like people to play with for years. Like when I was a kid, I was super interested in playing, and nobody wanted to play with me. I didn't have nearly enough people and places and things to have, like, and friends to be able to do this who were interested. And so, for years I just didn't do it. And then even when I did kind of find it, it was like, a lot of people similar to Sam, like the situation just really wasn't the best. Like my first real time playing D&D, and I mean, I should say my first real long form campaign, I should say. I played like a couple of one shots and stuff there, but it was all messed up. Like we started out at first with just like, 3 of us, which is great. But then we ended up like, we wanted to add more people who were like friends and stuff who said that they were also interested in playing. And since we were all kind of new to it, essentially, we were like, okay, cool. And, but eventually it ended up being where we had like freaking 8 to 9 players at one point. And one of the biggest issues too being was like, a lot of them wouldn't even necessarily show up consistently to the sessions. but then they'd show up again like 2 weeks later. They like drop in, drop out. And it was like, and it was a nightmare for our GM who was like trying to do this thing to like try and like set up encounters or craft things and build stuff where it was like, we don't know if we'll have 3 people to 9 people maybe who would just, because a lot of those people also they weren't consistent in replying to like schedule, being like, hey, this is what we're doing. We're gonna play here. And then a lot of the time, even when they would show up, a lot of them wouldn't actually be engaged in the game. They would start talking about other stuff. They would be completely unaware of what was happening. Like again, it would be like their turn, be like, oh wait, what? Sorry, what was happening? What should I do? And they're just like, why are you here? Like, we have come here to do this activity, to do this hobby, to play this game. If you just want to hang out, we can do that a different time. We have many other opportunities to do that, but this is the time for this. We all, specifically, at least those of us, again, who initially started this and wanted to do this, we set this time aside specifically for this. And and you said that you were interested and you wanted to participate. And so we were like, yeah, absolutely. We'd love to have you if you were like us, were interested and truly wanting to do and experience this game. And you're not.
Yeah.
And that was that had an incredible effect on many of us who were just super frustrated. And it kind of just fizzled out after a while, because it was just like, our GM again was getting like, he was getting burnt out, like hella burnt out from all this stuff. And eventually, like, they just had to drop it because they were just like, I can't, we can't. I'm like, yeah, we get it.
You can't justify having people who aren't committed. And
well,
like that's
it just sucked. It's like, like even like they loved still doing it for us who were involved, but there was just so many people who kept kind of going in and out, and there was a lot of drama that started to kind of happen within that group too for a number of other reasons as well. And it just kind of fizzled out. And it was unfortunate because it was an interesting enough campaign. It definitely had a lot of potential, a lot of ways. But like that in essence, like again, showed me it's like, yeah, that too many people for one thing, and these people on top of that just weren't actually invested or interested on top of that, which just it kept piling more and more bad stuff on top of it, which just made the whole thing literally implode. And it was really unfortunate because there were a lot of cool aspects and characters and a lot of things that we had learned and done up to that point. And one of my most favorite memories of all time of my D&D career is a part of that campaign where it's like literally it was my first ever character. It was a sorcerer that I had made. And me and this barbarian, like we basically had a thing where we were trying to basically execute kind of a heist of sorts. And we had all of our characters kind of separate into groups of 2 to be like, hey, you're going to be the one that does this particular part. You're going to be the one that does this. You're going to be the one that does that. And me and the barbarian's role is we were supposed to basically create a distraction to alleviate guard presence of like the institution or not institution, but of the place that we were trying to rob, right? And so we were going to go to the Colosseum in the city to like draw attention for fights. Like we were going to like start like, we're going to be this up and coming just out of nowhere team that comes in, just dominates, destroys, and tries to get as much attention as possible to pull guard presence away from that area. And it was amazing. Like we literally ended up fighting back to back to back. Like we fought I think we started out fighting a rock to start. From there, then we fought like a chimera, and then after that we fought a cyclops and the manticore was the second. We fought the rock, manticore, and then after that we fought a cyclops and chimera at the same time, and we came out on top. Like, and it was back to back, like no real rest in between. And so like running low on spell slots, the final fight, it was me and the barbarian. And what we kept doing is I kept running in, casting Shocking Grasp on the chimera. We were able to take out the cyclops previously with some more higher spells, and we were burnt out. And I would cast Shocking Grasp on the chimera, run away because they didn't have his reaction, and then the barbarian would come in and just start wailing on it, and it somehow missed like a number of its attacks against it. It was phenomenal. And just goes to show, again, I say that as like that will always forever live on in my memory as one of the most amazing like underdog like tooth and nail successes, just pulling out that victory. And then we were supposed to fight a beholder after that. We were like, no, screw that, we're out. And we just like we dipped the hell out and dimension doored away. But that being said, is like, so there, even with that campaign, with all that stuff, it ended up being imploded because of all of the aspects of it that were not great. People, we tried to communicate to people, we tried to talk to them about, like, what was going on, and they just weren't really receptive. And it was just kind of like, in that particular instance, it's not necessarily just anybody's fault overall. It was just a matter of, like, well, we were all new, kind of. We didn't have as much information, so too many people got involved. We were maybe too lenient. Some people could say, yeah, maybe we invited too many people, or we let too many people join, or that we weren't as communicative or clear on, like, session 0 on what was to be expected, with all these new people that were joined, because we didn't do another session 0 for every new person that joined. We had an initial session 0 for, like, the 4 people who were initially involved, and then people just started joining from then on, like, after the fact. And so it was like, because and that has been one of my, like, experiences in terms of, like, that's not great. Like, that's, having too many players like that is always gonna be just a big, like, unless, because I've heard of campaigns that apparently have, like, 10 people, and in those 10, though, it's like you have, like, one prime DM and then maybe, like, 2, like, assistant DMs or whatever that help to manage things. And I would be interested in maybe seeing how that works. I'm not entirely sure, like, what.
Well, that's a
how
that's a whole different style of play.
Yeah,
It requires a whole different kind of story.
Story,
A
as well
different,
as maybe, like, approach, as well as, like,
a different. It's a whole different mechanic,
yeah,
almost in and of itself.
foundation almost. And
For context, one of my DMs actually wanted to do something like that, where we created a Discord. It was like, hey, we talked to all of our friends who were interested in D&D, some people that he had met, some people that other people had met.
West March servers are also what
it was like a West March server, where it was this whole concept of, like, if someone wanted to run something, we could run something, and, like, people could be involved. If they didn't want to be, they could leave. If they wanted to join, they could. And it fizzled out in a month.
Yeah.
And I don't doubt that the person who created it was completely intentative of making it work. The problem is, and this is something that is unfortunately true, is that the more people you involve in something, in literally anything, the more problems you will have, just by probability's sake. It's something that, like, we learned when I started playing with my group. We started with 11 people. 11 people. Within a month, we were down to 5. And then a couple months later, we had our 6th. He had to leave. He came back years later. But the reality is that we started with over 10 people and ended up with 4 solid members. Yeah. Aside from the DM. And that's the reality is things like this, where you have to put effort in and everybody has to be on the same page, is the more people you involve, the less succinct it's going to be. It's going to cause problems. Even if everyone's on the same page, even if everyone's committed, you're still going to have problems because it isn't built for this. I think people forget. Like, I'll be honest. I'm gonna say Critical Role as an example. They have 8 players. That's not normal. That's not normal at all. Yeah. 4 players is normal. 5 players is okay. 3 players is probably more normal than 5 or 4 or 5. But 6 is usually a hard cap for most DMs, because it's a lot of personalities to deal with. The only reason it works for them is because they're professionals. They work together. They've created a content, like, empire together. This is what they do as a job. This isn't a hobby anymore. And I think that's a lot of people like, I've talked to people who play and they're like, well, I want to be like Matt Mercer, and then they DM and it's garbage. It's not an achievable goal unless
It's an achievable goal.
Well, you have to have, like, legitimate experience and money behind you. They do what they can do,
at least, yeah, on that same level, for sure.
Let's be real. Matthew Mercer, while still being a professional voice actor, can put a majority of his time into writing a full-time weekly D&D campaign from scratch for years now. Now, okay, let's bring that out. I work at a gas station or a McDonald's or a restaurant or a warehouse, or I'm a postman or a garbage man. I have to spend 8 to 12 hours a day working. 5 to 7 days a week, depending on the kind of job you work. Where in that time gives you the time to do that? It's not an achievable goal for most people unless you have an extremely forgiving work schedule or large amounts of time where you don't have to worry about anything else. That's what they do as a job. The reason I tell people it's not, don't look at them and be like, that's what I want to do 100%. No, that's what they do is for a living. They make money off of this. Yes, they still have their voice acting careers. Yes, they still do other things. But the fact of the matter is, for the most part, over 3 campaigns now, which have each been years in playing time, years, mind you, where they play 4-hour sessions every week, or every week, or sometimes they skip a week. Most of them are there for the entire time. That is a huge commitment that most people cannot abide by. You're going to have breaks. You're going to have weeks where you're not going to play because life is life and people have other things to worry about.
Yeah.
That expectation is not healthy.
Oh, I agree. I think
now,
you know, a lot of people will reference the issues as like the Mercer effect, right?
Well, and I don't like the Mercer effect.
I don't like that either.
Because Matthew Mercer is a genuine individual who he is not out here to try to change how people play the game.
No, and
this is how,
as a matter of fact, he legitimately loves this game and would absolutely encourage everyone to play how they want to play.
In fact,
doesn't, you know,
he's talked about other podcasts and live action people that play the game. I'm going to give an example. Matthew Mercer talked about Adventure Zone. Yep. I don't know if you're familiar with Adventure Zone. It's the McElroy family.
Yep.
Now, if you're like me, you love them in their comedic aspect. I listen to them very regularly. Now, their D&D or other TTRPG podcasts are great. Now,
they're super fun.
There is an issue there. There is the one time where Travis was the DM and it was terrible. But before that it was bad. I'm not gonna go into it. It was bad.
It wasn't great.
Their first D&D campaign was a first-time DM and first-time players. They were interested in it. They loved the idea of it. It was the 3 of them and their dad who played D&D.
Yeah.
Now, what kept them together is obviously they're all family. They love each other, no matter what the mistakes are.
Want to spend time doing this.
The reality is that while their DM Griffin put in a lot of time to write a story, it was a beautiful one, and I enjoyed the crap out of it. It was awesome.
Oh yeah, it was a great one.
My dad didn't like it as much as I did, but I loved it.
That first
He's the one who he introduced it to me. He didn't even like it as much as I did. He liked Amnesty more, which Amnesty was good too. But
Amnesty was cool.
The original Real Play podcast, they did not have a good grasp on the rules.
Oh no, are you kidding me? There was no grasp.
They did not play it correctly.
It was all on the fly.
Well, it was okay. They did okay. But you could tell it was very much a novel that was written, and they were just kind of there.
Yeah, they were going through, you know.
The cool part about it is the people at the table didn't give a shit.
No.
And they played into it like crazy.
100%. They just dove head in.
But you look at that, and it is a completely different direction of D&D than what Critical Role is. Yet Matt Mercer on live stream and in video has referenced them as people who they want to play with one day because they love what they did.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of a game like this. You don't have to be like Matthew Mercer. No. He is an anomaly in terms of what he brings to D&D. Is it something you can strive to emulate in terms of the effort he puts in for his table? Please.
Absolutely.
Please do.
Please
Not
do.
just as a DM, as a player. Look at what
Yeah.
he does. Look at what the people at his table do.
Look
There
at
are
Travis,
there
you
are
know,
there are
Liam.
YouTube channels. XP to Level 3 has great section of videos
Yeah.
about individual players and what they brought to that table and how important it was for their first campaign. Because most of it's about the first campaign, which is my favorite. But the first campaign was that's where they built themselves up to where they are now.
Yeah, no,
And you
100%.
look at what the effort they put in as people, both on the DM side and the player side. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not even close to what they put in, but I use what they did as an example of what's a good thing to try to achieve.
Again, and that's what I was saying before too. Is like people want to say like, I want to be like Matthew Mercer. I want to do this thing. I want to. It's like, okay, sure. You know what? Yeah, honestly, I think there's nothing wrong with trying to utilize that as a goal post, like an objective, to be like, you know what? I would love to be able to have that same kind of quality style. And that, again, to your point though, it depends on what specifically you are referencing. If you're talking about all of like the special effects and the terrain that Matt builds, the miniatures that he uses, like that shit, no.
That's time, that's money, that's things that people don't have.
Time, that is resources that is completely unrealistic for the vast majority of people who are going to be able to engage in this hobby. And if you have the capital or the time and whatever, like, sure, do that. That's really cool. That's why Matt does it. It's a great way, because again, I have also put a bit of resource in. Like, again, I do have some miniatures of characters that I particularly love and have been able to use, and it's fun, it's great. Like for a previous campaign, we did utilize like more terrain, but we usually we rigged that shit up from like a multitude of other board games, TTRPG games that we bought and we recycled and used that stuff. Like, we didn't just necessarily have specifically made miniatures of very specific characters or terrain or whatever. Like, we don't have the time for that. But you absolutely can still get that shit.
Yeah.
If
I want to give a great example of my first campaign and the things we used for miniatures in order. Coins.
Yep. We used
dice.
Coins. Yep, dice.
By the time we got miniatures, they were random. They were just miniatures that people bought in big packs, right?
Just random.
Some
like
of us
those bins.
Some of us bought miniatures more specific to our characters. Most of us did not until later on in the campaign. So we would, if some of us bought miniatures, we would share them.
We would use like caps too.
If someone thought, hey, that looks enough like my character, well, now those miniatures are kept separate from the others, and those are our characters' miniatures, even if they don't fully match up. Okay, well, what are we fighting? A dragon and a bunch of kobolds. Well, we have 2 kobold miniatures, no dragon miniature. So here's the 2 kobolds. The rest of these things over here are also kobolds. And the dragon is the weird robotic thing from the first Switch Zelda game. What's it called again? The game.
Not Breath of the Wild.
No, Breath of the Wild. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Breath of the Wild, the first one, they had those big robot guys with the tentacles.
Yeah, the guardian.
My buddy had a statue of one that he got from Comic-Con. He had a guardian statue. It was about the same size as a dragon. So boom, it's on the map. Yeah. Like, we used stuffed animals.
Yeah,
we used bottle
caps. We used
I think one time somebody bought a bunch of McDoubles and McChickens, and it was the right size for a huge monster. We just put a McChicken on the board. Like, the reality is like, you have to look at what you have available and go with that. And it doesn't take away, because guess what? That McChicken is an ancient. That McChicken is an ancient red dragon, and it's a spicy.
He will mess you up.
And it's a spicy McChicken, so that fire breath's gonna hurt. Yeah. So the reality is like, you can look at things that they do as people, and I think that is what you can aspire to. But their resources are. It's not fair.
It's not about the physical thing. That's not what you should truly strive for. And there are primarily. Okay.
There are plenty of free resources you can use.
That's what I'm saying.
Things like Roll20.
Yeah,
the free account for Roll20,
freaking Owlbear Rodeo, freaking and even Foundries, like it costs something initially to buy it, but it's really cool. I mean, there's all kinds of great things. And here's the thing, it's like, as Sam said, the physical aspects, like, don't aspire necessarily for that right now. That's not the most important part. The most important part that you should aspire to from Critical Role is their commitment.
It's
They want they Sam, like Sam said, it is their job. They have made something of it, but make no mistake, each and every one of them wants to be there. That is how they made this what they did. They started this because they wanted to do this thing. They want to be there. They are there, committed. They weren't necessarily making a shit ton of money of it in their first campaign.
How often do they still 3 campaigns in reference how they never thought
that this would be a thing, that this would happen for
all
them.
the time? They're still surprised by the fan reaction.
And it is insane. It's because it's an insane thing that happened.
You even look at some of the smaller real play D&D YouTubers and podcasts and things like that. Every time they go to play, when things happen and people offer their support, whether it's through fan art, money, donations, support in any way, whether it's emotional or others, they don't get it. They don't get it. Even Critical Role still reference people that surprise them, and they're years into a multimedia empire that they never thought they were going to have. They used to be part of Greek and Sundry. They're their own thing.
They literally they're not even they have their own studio now.
Like the reality is that they did so well because of what they've done for the table. They were all committed. Well, aside from one, but they're gone.
He was too, but he was committed too much
to the wrong things.
Guess what? Things.
You know what they did, which is a great example of how to handle a table? They're gone. Because they're not cohesive to
the experience together.
And that's not just for audience. No, it's for them.
It's for them. That's what their own comfort. They are there because they want to be. Because it's not really for us. They do it for themselves. They enjoy it.
It just so happens that everyone loves it.
How many times does everybody love it when Travis is like, oh my god, man! Like when Travis freaks the hell out about some shit that happens in the game, and he's just like, he is still.
And he's not doing it for us. He's doing it.
He's not for himself. And again, he was brand new to D&D in the first campaign.
Most of them were.
Yet he had never played before, and he was so down. He was so into it, and he still is. They still are because. And again, to be fair, yes, Matthew is an incredible GM. The amount of effort he puts in, and again, to be fair, I'm sure he also is incredibly busy, especially at the beginning stages of that. No doubt. He was still probably busy with things like he had a full time, career. And although to be fair, even as a voice actor, you absolutely can go weeks, if not months, sometimes with like no freaking work at all. Like that is a thing that happens, and that's natural. But even then, he also played the game for years, his entire life. His mom played the game. For God's sakes,
that's how it is.
Grew up on that, so he did it because he wanted to and still wants to, because he still loves this game, and because this is something that he's passionate about, and he continues to do it. Like it's and that is the thing you should emulate. That is the thing that you should try and to imprint on yourselves and your campaigns, is that commitment and that love and that desire to have fun with your friends, make new friends, and have fun with them. In a campaign, at a table, to include them and to make an amazing narrative story experience that you guys will remember for years to come.
Yeah. I mean, Adam, you can attest to this. When I had you over for 4th of July, I would say 6 to 8 of those people were only there because of D&D.
Yep, because of D&D.
Because these are the people who I met and love. Because of the experiences we had together. Now, I want to remind everybody here, before we start talking about the unfortunate GM side of things, because we've talked very much about
players,
but I want to remind everyone here as a last bit for players. When they started playing D&D, the only 2 people in that group who had played before were Liam and Taliesin.
Yeah.
Everybody else, Laura, Travis, Sam Riegel, Ashley, everybody, like Marisha, nobody had played D&D. So if we want to talk about the amount of effort, imagine your first game of D&D. You barely know the rules. You're just figuring this out, and someone comes to you with a legitimate deep storyline, how difficult would it be to immediately get yourself in character and figure it out?
To be fair,
they
except for Marisha, professional, voice actors.
But
to be fair,
Marisha's worked in things like the Renaissance Fair and done other things similar to those jobs. Let's be real. A lot of the people I've met playing D&D, whether it's through the people I actually play with or people I've talked to online, are not as outgoing, okay, as these people. So I feel sympathy towards people who look at that and they're like, that's what it's supposed to be, and I can't do that. Now, we've talked about this before. When I started playing D&D, I was not very social. I was lucky for the fact that while I was playing D&D, I was also working a service job where I was forced to learn how to be social,
or at least interactive.
At least receptive to what people are saying.
No choice.
And so I was forced into a position I didn't want to be in, but it was very advantageous for me after the fact. Now, I urge people who love the idea of this fantasy collaborative storytelling game as players. I'm going to talk to players first because I don't DM really. I do one shots and then I run away. The reality is that no matter where you come from, no matter what your experience level is and things like this, trying is more important than anything. You go to any foreign country from America or any foreign country from anywhere else, and if you go there speaking even a modicum of their language, they appreciate that way more than you being deadpan. I don't know. I don't want to try.
Except as long, there is the other caveat
anywhere.
Of like, oh no, like specifically in terms of like if you come there and like if you start speaking broken dialect and acting
trying
like
no,
if it's a legitimate attempt. Yes,
yeah,
like
just try.
You are respectful and you're aware. It's like like I'm sorry. I'm not adept at this at all. I'm not perfect. Like but I'm the fact again that you are making a legitimate, respectful attempt is always appreciated. Almost anything.
Yeah,
again,
I'll give a good example. It's I went to Cancun. Look at me. I'm like white as they come. All right. People, if I go to the beach, people have to shield themselves from me because I reflect sun off my skin. And my face is more tan than like my legs.
Oh yeah, no, I mean you're like
you know what I mean? Like, come on now, I have to wear clothes so it's not as tan.
No,
the reality
you're almost albino, but if that's it's like
I am painfully Caucasian, as opposed to my friend here. Now the reality is I went to Cancun with my significant other who is Mexican. Now I know kitchen Spanish. I know warehouse Spanish. I know how to say certain things, or I more often than not I understand things. I can't speak it well. Speech impediment aside, I don't pronounce things okay.
Fair.
I can't roll my R's. I have my own physical problems with that. But the reality is that the entire time I was in Cancun, I used as much Spanish as I physically could.
Yeah.
Whether it was ordering food, whether it was saying please and thank you for beverages and food that were served to me, whether it was just being genuine to the people that work there,
respectful of their culture.
I was in
a home.
You're in a resort. They speak English. Everyone speaks enough English to get by because you're in a resort. That's they have to. That's the requirement for them to be employed there. But the reality is that they are way more comfortable
with Spanish.
And with Spanish, with their native language.
With their native tongue, yes.
So while I can't say full sentences and I can't have a full conversation, the reality is that at every given opportunity, I'm going to attempt to speak in their native language because I'm not at home.
Or at least, to try.
I'm in their home. So you try. And if they can see that you're trying and you may mess up a little bit.
And it's a legitimate try. It's a legitimate
you may mess up. You may have moments where you falter and you're like, I can't. That's okay. But the reality is it's the same as things like this, where just try. And the people who are around you will respect you for it. Even if it doesn't end up the way you want it to.
If this campaign is any worth your time in any way, shape, or form.
Even just the people around you.
It is imperative that again this is a space, this is a moment of opportunity to try. That's always what this is. Matt says it all the time, right? You can certainly try. That's a staple, because that's
It's-
literally what D&D is essentially about.
It's a double entendre. It's not just trying on an encounter, it's trying overall.
Trying in the campaign. It's trying,
Yeah.
hey, try something different. Try to be a version of yourself that maybe you don't have access to in the real world as much. Just try. And again, any campaign, and again, if it doesn't work out, then you'll learn very quick that, okay, this maybe isn't a campaign for me. This group isn't a group for me, maybe. Because if you try, and maybe it doesn't, like Sam said, maybe it doesn't turn out the way that you wanted it to, but if it is received and taken positively and constructively, and people are like, dude, that's great, that's awesome, yeah, do that. We love we love that. Keep trying. That can be so helpful for you, both in and out of game, exponentially so. And that's again one of the beauties of this game and of this hobby, is that it can help in that way that you don't even necessarily initially think or expect it to, but you do. Like almost with anything, everything in life, you have to try.
Yeah,
you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. You know,
yeah.
And it's like
as cheesy as those first grade posters.
As cheesy as Wayne Gretzky and Michael Scott, it is true.
It is,
and it's
unfortunately so true.
It is so unfortunately true and prevalent in D&D, where it's like you gotta try something. You gotta try something.
You have to put something of yourself forward to even have a chance.
And not everything, just a part of yourself, a piece of yourself. And trust me, trust us, it will do wonders. You can go so far with that. Believe us. That being the case, I will touch upon again one more potential thing about players before we talk about more about GMs. Is I also have, in my experiences, I know you might not necessarily have a problem with the GM, not necessarily have a problem with the group, right? You guys are driving, but maybe there's a bit of conflict with like one other player in the group, right? For whatever reason, this player seems to have something towards you. I don't know how much you've had about this, Sam, but I have had a multitude of experiences where it's like, for whatever reason, this character, maybe the player themselves, just seems to have an issue or problem with your character. And maybe you as a player. It's hard to say at times, because again, like Sam said, even though you should always try your best not to take things personally, the unfortunate truth is that in almost every aspect of life, and this is by no means excluded, things will always be personal on some level, because there are personal parts of you in here. Like we just said, every character that you make is a part of you, is a piece of you, and is gonna represent you in some way, shape, or form. And so if you have another character in the party who, for whatever reason, just seems to just have some shit towards your player, or your character rather, and despite all your best efforts, because I know what I've done as a player in games, if I have characters who are for some reason like picking on me or messing with me or trying to, like, what's the word that I'm looking for? When they kind of just are like trying to knock you off your pedestal or something like that.
Well, they're definitely targeting you.
Targeting, sure, yeah, targeting. It's like I have tried things like, you overall, it is probably best initially. I think in my experience, the initial best response first is in game. If they're messing with you, saying some stuff in game, address it in game in terms of, like, as your character being like, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? Like, why are you acting so whatever? Or like, what's the deal, mate? What's your problem? What's going on? Or to at first, maybe gauge it a bit in game to see if, like, maybe this is a character choice of theirs, right? Because that's absolutely a possibility. Some players make these certain character choices and they kind of get stuck in them, right? They make a character choice to be an asshole, and then they just start they get stuck in that veneer that they put on to be an asshole, even if they don't necessarily like it, right? And you start being like, hey, and if things start to escalate and they start to mess with you, at that point, you need to take it out of game. At that point, and what I've done multiple times is, like, literally, again, in my first ever campaign, I can reference that one again with my sorcerer. Like a party member in there, for whatever reason, like, her character, she was literally just kind of chaotic evil. Like, she initially put it as like chaotic neutral, but she was really evil. She would steal stuff. She would attack people or knock them out, like, just to take their things or whatever. She wouldn't really work with the party, or she would kind of dismiss, do her own thing. And she would pick on my character a lot of the time. And, my character would react and even though they didn't necessarily get along, he still understood that they were on the same team, and he would try to help her. He would support her in terms of combat, in terms of, like, choices if she was in trouble, and he would try to, like, he would try to establish an emotional connection, but she was never really receptive to that. And so eventually, like, it escalated to the point where she was now trying to like physically do things to my, like, she tried to give my character like a wedgie, right? And try to like, and I was like, okay, like this is going a bit far now. All right. And so I literally, like, you know, out of game, I was literally like, okay, what is going on? Like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you messing with my character and literally trying to bully him and give him like an actual, like, what is the reason for that? Like, what is, like, because there seems like no other reason except for whatever, like, you have something against my character and you're trying to mess with him. Why? And, you know, they responded, they were like, I don't know. I'm sorry. Like, I'm not actually trying. Like, you know, it's just a game. Like, I'm not trying to be, I'm not, you know, it's nothing personal. I'm like, well, but it is though, because like, even though it's a game, what is fun about that? Like, what is fun about you trying to give my character away? What do you get out of that exactly? Because it's not necessarily fun for me. Like, you're not doing it like in a, like, and I don't really think there is like a fun, you know, like peaceful or camaraderie way to give somebody else a wedgie. Like, that's just not, you know, usually it's a crappy kind of, again, bully thing to do. And she's like, I don't know. I guess I don't really want to be acting this way, but I felt like I got caught in a bit of a character trait or personality, and I feel kind of stuck there. And I'm like, okay, well, don't be then. You don't have to be that way. Just because you made a character choice initially doesn't mean that you have to stick with that. Like, me and Sam referenced that earlier. Your character can grow. Your character can change, especially if it's not necessarily a thing that you're having fun with or liking, you know? Like, in the case of this particular player, she was saying she didn't really like that. She just she felt stuck there. I have heard this from other players too, where they make a choice and they feel like they can't renege on that. They feel like they can't backstep from that. They feel like, okay, I did this and now I'm here and I can't I don't know how to get out of it. Just stop. Just take a second, reassess, be like, okay, you know what? I don't really like this. Or maybe this is conflicting with the party a bit. This maybe isn't a great trait to have. Maybe I need to let that go. You know? Yeah. I think we referenced this before too, in terms of like, maybe I think we might a little bit more too, is like, retcons in game should not be just strictly taboo. Make some retcons if it is for the overall enjoyment of everyone at the table.
I also think there's something wrong with if you create a character and then you do a session 0, and which is usually like an introduction to everybody, and you meet all the other characters and it just doesn't jive. Be like, hey, I don't think this is gonna work, so I'm gonna do a new character. Because if everyone else seems cool, if everyone else seems like, yeah, we all get along, and you're the odd man out, you're not a problem. Don't think of yourself as a problem, but maybe think about it and talk to you and be like, hey, maybe I don't think this works what I imagined this character would be. So either I'll make a new one or drastically change what I was going to do. I've had that before. It's nothing to be ashamed of, especially like I've been pretty on top of being like a, you know, confident, always present role player for a long period of time.
Good.
I still make mistakes. There's still characters you bring to the table where you're like,
yeah,
ooh, maybe
I overstepped a little bit.
This did not work out the way I wanted it to, and maybe there's a chance for me to fix this. And I think with putting yourself out there for a character, along with maybe having to change things, is a little bit hard for people to do, but it's all part of collaborating. I think that's the most, it's cooperation to the point of like, you all have to work together and you're all human beings. So you might as well put your best foot forward and try. Even if things don't fully work out, even if you make something that people don't like and then you're like, well, I'll tweak it, and they still don't like certain parts of it, there's always room for growth. So I will say this, and I urge people to understand, not everybody at the table has to like everything about your character.
No, it doesn't have to be
a thing. And that includes the DM. The reality being is that if they don't, you have to be willing to take the punches a little bit. Like, you know, you gotta adapt.
Roll with it, you know, slightly.
If you're playing a character that not the other characters get along with too great, but you're still there for the same reasons, you're gonna have to be able to role play a little bit of a punch back and forth, which is fine. I've done it before. It's not the worst thing. You just have to be able to separate yourself from a character. On top of that, you have to be okay with a little bit of flack thrown your way if you're committed to a character that you think will work with some growth. Because that's the cool part.
That
the
is
cool
important.
part is it has to be
to be about growth. It has to be about, you have to shift at some point.
Yeah. And you don't shift when everyone hates you. You shift before that.
No. Oh, well, I mean, and maybe you can, like, here's the thing. It also depends on the exact flavor or way that everybody is hating you. Right?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to reframe.
And the reason why they're hating you. Are they hating you in character, specifically because is your character, again, being detrimental to the party? Are you throwing them into situations or causing chaos and discord and all this stuff for reasons that aren't actually truly fair or applicable or reasonable? That it might be an indicator, and it's like, again, that becomes, it's not necessarily like the characters themselves are maybe having some conflicts or disagreements. That's literally, you are just messing everything up. And at that point, those other player characters, they have no reason to keep you in the party. Why would they want you there in the party? Again, that is another big aspect and thing. It's like, one, why is your character in the party? Why is your character part of here? Why is your character doing this? And two, why should any of those characters want you still in the party for all the decisions and things that you're making? That is one other thing there, and that I think would be a good indicator of being like, hey, maybe you might want to think about shifting your character or maybe getting a new one if you can't. On the other hand, if it's the essence or the way of, like, the characters in the party are disagreeing or maybe not necessarily liking the way your character handles a situation because they, based off of their ideals, their personality, it doesn't jive. That's one thing. Your characters don't necessarily have to be friends or jive or connect in that particular kind of way, right? It can absolutely be like, hey, especially in the case, let's say you're playing an evil campaign, maybe even evil character, right? In the sense of an evil campaign, you're evil. Most of your characters are going to probably be intrinsically selfish to some sense. They're not necessarily going to trust their party members and stuff because they are paranoid, because they know maybe at some point they could be betrayed. They don't trust like that. But the reason they are together, they are in this, is because their current machinations and goals align with each other, and they have come to the logical conclusion that they have a higher chance of accomplishing said goals together rather than separately. And they might disagree. They might have conflict. Even Sam, we talked about before, conflict isn't automatically bad in a game. In fact, it can be an amazing tool for an incredible experience in the game, especially between two separate characters. But conflict needs to have a purpose, and then the purpose and intention of the eventual mutual growth and shift at some point. You have to have a character who is willing to compromise. If you're going to have conflict, they need to then be able to compromise in some way. If you have an uncompromising character and then conflict begins to arise, there is no true progression. There is no true growth at that point. It's not productive. There will be nothing for it. It will just stay conflict, and then it will just become toxic. At that point, that's an issue. And that's, again, in reference to another experience that I've had with a player, is like that. I have had a number of experiences with in reference to the previous thing that I talked about. I talked to this player, and it got better. We had that conversation. I told them, I was like, hey, this is not like, this isn't fun. This doesn't feel fun to me. It feels like you are messing with me for this reason or whatever. And she gave kind of some reasons, and eventually she came to she admitted and came to she's like, I'm feeling, I guess, kind of like, not necessarily jealous, but like a lot of my characters usually come through as being much more confident and higher status at times because I'm a more confident role player. I am a professional actor, voice actor. I've done this for a bit as well. And so I usually portray myself as such. And they felt maybe a little bit kind of intimidated or kind of whatever, apparently, at least by their words specifically. And so they felt they kind of reacted in a way of what they kind of wanted to, like, I guess, again, knock me off my pedestal or to whatever. And when I addressed this with them and we talked about it openly, you know, without kind of bias or judgment, they began to shift. They began to be like, okay, you know what? I don't want to necessarily play this kind of personality archetype anymore, this trait. And they shifted, and our relationship in game and out got exponentially better, where it was like their character, even though they didn't shift everything about their character, and they were still kind of more not lone wolfy, but you know, they kind of did what they did. They were still roguish, they were still you know, they still like to do kind of, but they weren't just so like objectively douchey and mean and shitty and just like for no reason just causing and doing all this selfish stuff, right? They began to have much more of a reason and be much more attentive and conscious of the choices and their actions that they made in game. Now, the opposite of that, I've had another player who was not that at all, who was just for whatever reason, like had an issue or problem with my character, was shitty. And again, not necessarily even just to my character, but then also kind of out of character as well in ways where they were kind of just, I don't know, again, I still don't really know the reason behind it. I don't know if they were feeling intimidated again, like, cause like just referencing previous experience I had, like they felt intimidated by me, or if they, and I'm not trying to do this to like toot my own horn or whatever, being like that I'm so amazing or great that they should be like, I'm literally just wondering, like I was just spitballing and trying to figure out what could possibly be the reason for why they have chosen to kind of act in such a manner towards my character, and then also at moments subsequently me as a player. Because I mean, my character had in no way, shape, or form done anything to them that, in my opinion, should warrant this. Like or not even opinion, just logically, because I hadn't actually, we had only had like 1 or 2 sessions, and our characters had just met each other. And I had no way, like I hadn't stolen from them, I hadn't attacked them, I hadn't like necessarily said anything off the cuff towards them or about them or anything like that. Like, and so it just it became weird because he just always seemed to try and like lay as much of the blame of any situation that. And to be fair, that entire campaign was absolutely toxic and doomed from jump. This is the cringe campaign that I was telling you about before, Sammy, where all of the like the GM, and we're gonna get into the GM part of that from this specific, because that's like that is my go-to horror story, because almost everything about that campaign was just utterly horrendous in every way, shape, or form. Again, there was more than just one player like that. The main player was this barbarian dude, but then also there's another player who was like a fighter, yet also kind of like he was new to the game, but for some reason he also just seemed like he just wanted to like slap me 4 times for some reason, and just thought that would have been funny if he had just run up and like attacked me 4 times for some reason. A lot of real toxic kind of messed up stuff in that game, just almost all around. But in regards to players like that, where you just have like, you know, and it might even just be chalked up to that's just kind of life, right? Sometimes you just encounter people that for whatever reason, they just don't like you, or you just don't like them. Like
you just don't get along with them.
There's just something about that person or something about you that just, for whatever reason, they're just like, I cannot vibe or fit with that. Maybe that's all that was. I don't know. Again, I still don't know. There was no I literally asked him in game. Like I asked him in game again, like I said, like his character was always constantly trying to blame shit on my character, or like knock me down, like, you know, kind of like, you know, I can't think of the word. It's like when you're like again, when you're trying to like lower someone's self-esteem or whatever like that. Like, you know, he'd always try to like do that stuff. And even like when he would make mistakes and my character would call him out on it, he wouldn't acknowledge it. He would instead try to again flip it back on me and reflect back on me. And I asked him again, I'm like, okay. I was like, what's the deal? Why are you being such a butthead? Like what's going on? Why are you being so whatever? Like when you make a mistake and you mess up, you should acknowledge and own it. Like I didn't do that thing. What's up? You know, and he didn't have an answer. He didn't respond. He was just like, what, like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm fine. You know, he tried, he did not, even though I offered a chance even in game, because I was like, all right, I'm not going to take this personally as a player, but my character is also not just going to stand by and sit here and take all of this kind of like accusation and abuse for no reason. Like I, as a player, as well as my character, is curious. What's your deal? What's your problem? Let's talk about it. Let's engage, and maybe hopefully, because again, my character, as always, like, hey, we are part here. Even if we don't necessarily agree or mesh, that doesn't mean that we can't come to at least a mutual respect on like, hey, we need each other for these things, and we're going to respect each other as warriors, as professionals, whatever, to get this job done. You know, we don't have to like each other as friends, but at least we should respect one another as adventurers. And he just didn't have an answer, and he just didn't, and it kind of just went on like that. And for people in those situations, that if it feels like a person, another player, for whatever reason, is just targeting you, it just seems to have some shit towards you just for the sake of it, I don't really know if there is any real way to handle it or to fix it, except for if you just address it, ask them. Because again, and maybe you might have a similar situation as I did. I've had both. I've had one where I talked to them and it fixed everything. Like they got way better. I mean, not everything necessarily, you know, but they got way better. And because it was also their first time playing the game before. When I talked to them, we talked it out. We had a very, you know, non-judgmental, safe, frank conversation, and we made progress. We got there. It was productive, and things got better. It really the situation. Our interactions, both in game and out of game, were far better, and just got better from there. And I've had the same situation where this guy is just an asshole, and I ask him about it. I talk to him. I'm like, hey, what's going on? What's up? Let's talk. What's going on? And he didn't want to talk. He was like, no, what? No, I'm fine, but everything's fine. I don't know what you're talking about. You know, whatever. And it's just like, well, there's clearly something up, but all right, you don't want to talk, then that's about all you can do. You can do is offer that olive branch. That olive branch.
I think if the person doesn't take it, if they don't take that olive branch, I feel like that's the end of that. Like you leave. As much as it sucks, I think it's the best. I mean, you can tell me yourself what
you talk to your GM. You talk to your GM and other players and be like, hey,
am I doing something wrong here?
Yeah, am I doing something that's like, does anybody else feel this way too? Am I doing something, or am I crazy? Does it not seem like he's being whatever towards me? Am I doing something that might be annoying or frustrating for people? Like, what's up? And then, you know, they're like, no, I think you're fine. I don't have an issue. And okay, well, do you kind of see, or again, am I crazy? Like, it seems like he's kind of doing something against my character, you know, and people are like, yeah, kind of, you know, then you have the GM ask, like, say, you know, hey, this isn't really comfortable or fun for me. If every time I come in here and like my character and his character start getting into arguments or fights about everything all the time, because he's like accusing my character of something or doing something when like I'm literally just playing the game, like that's not really fun for me. You know, I would say then talk to your GM and ask your GM like, hey, and he's not willing to talk to me. I've already tried to talk to myself. Like, can we have like a go-between, maybe like a mediator kind of thing or something? And if that player is still resistant, then I would say again, any good GM would be like, okay, look, we gotta make sure that this is okay. Like you can't, you know, we can't constantly be having conflict and issue in the party as you know, characters that also maybe kind of feels out of game as players. Like if we're not going to talk about this, then maybe you're just, you know, you can't just keep doing this and being this way. But I don't know. The situation is always very circumstance, and I know it's hard in any situation to be confrontational, because that is what it would be. Confrontation. It would be you having to reference, address, and talk to this player and be like, hey, and that's scary sometimes. A lot of the time, it's hard. Confrontation is hard. It's never comfortable. It's very always scary. Super uncomfortable.
Oh, I can say from my own personal experience, confrontation, my least favorite thing to.
Oh, it's almost everybody's least favorite thing.
Well, not
everyone. Real confrontation. Like there's a difference between, I feel like, actual confrontation in terms of like, again, you're confronting an issue that you're trying to be productive about, and a person just flying off the handle and like, you know, just being aggressive or hostile.
That's fair. That's not really confrontation.
Yeah, I feel like that's more like you're just being hostile and aggressive.
Well, I'm definitely more akin to the second one as opposed to actual confrontation.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Confrontation is hard because it's like you have to come at it from a very open and more emotional, vulnerable place. Is how I like to define it, I guess.
I think that's
that might not be as accurate, to be fair.
No,
that's how I like to distinguish between being truly like confrontational with an issue or problem and just being over like just straight up hostile at that point, because that's hostility usually is never going to be productive. You're never really going to come to a mutual understanding or place. You're just going to start inciting shit and fighting a lot of the time. But with that, let's go ahead, since we already referenced. Let's talk a little bit about problematic GMs and situations and dynamics with that. We got a little bit more time here. Probably gonna get out of here in a little bit, but we got a little bit of time to touch upon it.
I think I do want to touch on some lesser issues. Not as detrimental to the campaign.
Please do. Yeah.
I do want to start with, as we've talked about in the class, or not the class, the ability score video. The whole idea of
application of like skills,
where they're
appropriate, where they're how you define
whether a DM is using a module or writing their own thing. The concept of severely limiting what roles you can make. So, sorry. So if a DM comes to you and they're like, yeah, we have this, and you go try to do it, and it's a puzzle of some sort, or an encounter of some sort that is not combat related, and they give you a chance to roll something, and you roll it, and you fail, and then they just fall silent. Like it's like the only thing that can happen is you leave. That's a problem. Something I have learned to appreciate is the fact that a DM is supposed to be there always. Even if you had, so I'm gonna give an example. And this is an example we've talked about before. I send my party on a quest, they do it, they come back, and there's an area they're supposed to find. And in my head, as a DM, it would take a DC 18 investigation check to find it. Now, they don't talk to anyone, they run right to it. They take that 18 investigation, and they roll a 16. And they don't have any other way to reroll. They don't have any additives. They all rolled whatever you give them as charity. And now you're sitting here wondering, well, shit. They didn't finish the encounter. So now the toxic DM will just sit there. Not say anything, nothing. They just sit there.
And therefore now you're just stuck.
You're stuck.
No other evidence. So you are a failure.
Now the cool part about D&D is that there is always another avenue.
There should always be another way. There should always be another avenue.
Let's look at the fact.
Our imagination is literally the limit.
Yeah. So what we've talked about is the fact that opening a hidden door has many answers. Whether you perceive the seams in a stone wall as to be not normal to the rest of the stone wall, whether you investigate to find the hidden switch, whether you try to just break it down anyway. There's many avenues, whether it's from magic or physical perspective, anything. And so I think something that I had to deal with early on in one of my campaigns was the fact that there was always one answer for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And as a player, I was definitely more akin to being okay with that because it was a module. But
which is very streamlined and
but to be fair, I've read modules, and a lot of them do have a couple different ways to do things. Now, I think as
in place if they
I think as a DM, having someone fail and then just not saying anything is not the answer.
Not providing any other context or any other paths to follow or try.
Now, I understand from a DM's perspective, when you give them something to figure out and they just don't roll well, your immediate reaction is there's a consequence. Now, my thing is, the consequence shouldn't be it's a dead end. The consequence should be one of two things I think is reasonable. One, if they do manage to figure it out from some other way, that things are harder from that point because they weren't able to figure it out the normal way, whether it's extra noise, whether they had to leave and come back and someone figured out that they've been messing with it, whatever it is. If there is a secret passageway and they don't figure it out the first time, well, the next time they go through, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. I think, to me, as a player, if we fucked up and we came back later and it was more difficult, that makes sense to me. Now, the other way a DM can handle something like this is give them something to do that gives them another chance. Now, I'm going to give an example of one of my games. We did some investigation on a historical figure. It was an evil historical figure. They had a secret laboratory somewhere. As we were told by a group of underground, it was an underground cult, like not a cult, but like a thieves guild type thing, but with more honor involved. And so their whole thing was finding information and cataloging it. But they found information on this person. They were worried about what they did in their life, and they tasked us to finding a hidden lab. They gave us some information to work off of. Great. And then they said, hey, if you're looking for anything else, this is where he used to be. So our immediate thought was, hey, let's go find out what we can. Now, the reality was, we went through all this shit. We kind of found some clues. We found a ledger dictating where materials were sent to build something like a lab. We went there, and we came to a place. We were on like a cliffside meadow, ostensibly. Like, imagine you're traveling around, and one side's the cliff, but there's like a half mile out towards you hit that cliff on one of the corners. And so we stopped there. And we're like, well, this is where the delivery was. So what are we supposed to do? And everyone had a couple ideas. We tried them. Nothing worked. And we all kind of sat there looking at each other. And the DM looked at us and he went, well, you already know this. But keep in mind, this was a high, powerful magic user. Their entrance is not going to be sitting there on the ground. Now, to me, some people might say, well, that's metagaming. But the reality is that we had taken notes, we had put in all this effort, and we overlooked a very simple problem. Someone with a lot of magic isn't going to walk into their own fortress just like any mundane human being could. So we now had to think, what's other ways you could enter into something? If there is something underneath this area that we're currently sitting on, how else are we going to get there? My first action as a warlock or one of our arcane proficient casters was, well, I can fly. What if the entrance is halfway down the cliff face? What if it's down there? Because realistically speaking, any normal person walking by will look out, they'll look at the ocean, and they'll go back to what they're doing. And even if they look down, they're not going to be able to see it because of the way cliff faces can be concave.
Yep.
So my thought was, well, let's see if there's anything on the side of the cliff. We're pretty high up. The ocean's all the way down there. Let's just give it a good look-see.
Why not? You can fly. And, no reason not to.
You know, I cast fly on me and another person because my warlock spell slots allowed me to. We floated down and we found a cave.
Lo and behold.
Now, nothing our DM said, hey, look for a cave. Not one thing.
But you utilized the information that you had and you came to the logical deduction and conclusion.
He reminded us the nature of the encounter. And he said, maybe think a little bit more out of the box.
Yeah.
Because that's not a bad thing to tell your party. We're people. We think about certain things. And so he gave us an opportunity to rethink before we just gave up.
See, that's something I want to touch upon very specifically. And the things that we have, I think, referenced a multitude of times on all of our videos is GMs seem to have this kind of almost compulsion at times to feel like, okay, the best way for me to make this game like, you know, harder and therefore like more interesting or fun is to withhold information.
Yeah.
Is to make every information or every check or anything as difficult to achieve and acquire as possible. Like we're gonna make it so it's gonna be so hard. We're gonna and I've been in some campaigns that are like this over that felt exactly like this, where it's just like every little thing seemed to just always be. And a lot of people I think will also use this and like, yeah, we're doing a more realistic campaign where all this stuff. It's like, well, this is a fantasy, my man. Like we talked about, we said this earlier to this video here, is like D&D is about creating and fabricating a world that is somewhere between fantasy and a reality. Like it should meet in between, in the middle. That's that sweet spot. If you can get a game that is like right smack dab in the middle of reality and fantasy, like that's in my opinion, I think where you really find peak D&D. And that's how it shouldn't be a goddamn chore all the time to travel, right? It shouldn't be a thing where you have to like sit there and literally like wait like days, in real life days, to travel to a point. Nobody wants to do that. That's not fun. That's not part of the game. That's, again, exploration absolutely is a pillar, but that's not exploring. You're literally just like, it's one thing if you're like maybe going through and like, you're like, hey, the GM puts down a couple of really cool, like, what do they call them when you see landmarks, like landmarks. And some other spaces like, hey, this is cool, we can check that out, or have some random encounters and stuff. That's great. You're still engaged in it. But if you're like literally just like, yeah, you guys are traveling for days, how many rations do you guys use tonight? All right, keep track of that. Do you have actual ingredients to cook the food that you're wanting to eat? All right, keep track of that. All right, you guys have this. All right, cool. You guys are going to sleep. All right, have a thing out. All right, cool. You guys are done resting. Let's keep going.
Well, I will say there's definitely levels to it. When I think of it,
agreed, there always is.
So there's things like travel that I think can rub people the wrong way. The reality is, if a DM expects you to have certain things on a long travel period, they will make it known to you beforehand,
or at least they should,
as a good DM.
But my point being is that there are GMs
You're right.
that don't, who try to do that whole gotcha thing, where it's like, oh, you guys forgot to you didn't say you were gonna go buy rations and like other supplies, even though you knew you were gonna go camping for like days, if not weeks at a time. So now you're screwed. It's like, that is not an uncommon thing, which is a problem. Which is
why I always play Outlander, because they can't deny what it gives you.
They can, because they'll be like, well, you can't just simply be like, because of your background, you can do that. That's not
even though fair. That's what it says.
Even though that's literally what it says.
Yeah, so
that's what it does.
As we're talking about this, there's a wide variety of toxic game master traits. One of them is the constant issue of, instead of working with your players, you work against them.
It's a player versus GM mentality.
Because that's not, like, it's something that I had to learn when I first did, one shots and things of that nature, is that you can design things to be difficult.
But they don't have to
and
be.
You can make a case for enemies being ruthless. But the encounter is not designed
for them to
ruin.
Fail.
Well, no, it very well could be designed to fail. There are instances where that's okay. Things like pre-written modules or sandbox games where there are difficult things that your players can walk into, and it is too hard.
Yeah.
But as a DM, I think there is a spot somewhere in there, right before they go there or during an encounter, where you can be like, there's ways to tell people something. One of my favorite things to do as a DM is I've put very difficult monsters in front of a lower level party, and they're like, well, we're gonna kill it. I'm like, okay, we can do that.
I mean, obviously, then at that point, you always use, again, another very ancient adage in the community is, "Are you sure?"
I always ask, and they go for it. If they go for it, and then they start fighting, and someone will inevitably ask me, how do they look? And it's something as a DM where you can be dishonest. You can say, well, you don't know, or it looks bad, or it doesn't look bad. My mantra as a DM is if I really think it would be hard for them to tell if it's like a spectral entity or a god or something where like you might not actually be able to tell where they're at, then I'll have them make a check. But if we're
Sure.
fighting things on the mortal plane with an anatomy that you could at least attempt to understand, we're not fighting an ooze or what are those things in the Underdark that hang out like stalagmites and then pull people off of bridges and
Ropers.
shit? Ropers. Okay, great example. There are aberrations that don't look like beings. They look like something inanimate or a thing you could never dream of. It would be hard to tell where that monster is health wise. But if my players are fighting a dragon, for example, and they're a little underleveled, and I told them they like this is going to be tough, and they win it anyway.
Yeah,
And they get a round off. The dragon uses fire breath. It kills one of them, but they bring them back. Like it brings one of them down. They bring them back, and they're all pretty okay. And they ask me after the second round of combat, they're like, because the dragon doesn't get his breath back, they're all still alive. We're at the top of the third round initiative, and they go, "How does it look?" If they didn't do enough damage, if I look at my sheet of monsters and I went, this thing's gonna fucking mop the floor with them. They're not prepared for this. I'm gonna be like, it doesn't look phased.
You could say
and
that.
they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, it doesn't seem to care about the damage you've done to it.
So far.
And when they start to freak out, and I'll be like, what do you think of doing at this point? Because as a DM, I'm not trying to pigeonhole them into a bad decision, but I'm not going to tell them run. I'm going to give them all the information they can within a reasonable doubt.
I know, I agree. I was gonna say here's what I will say too. Is also in regards to a lot of the time when players ask for like the conditions of monsters, a good rule of thumb, and I think it is usually like a bit of a so-called homebrew rule a lot of people use, is like GMs will usually be like, it's bloodied when it is at half
we use
health.
that. It's half health.
Is usually the only indicator that you really have that you are like dealing like a bit of damage. Is basically being like when you get it down to half health or below, it's like it is bloodied.
And I think it's so reasonable.
I think certain cases can be made for any kind of creature or whatever to be able to discern its physical description. If it is a physical, and even even like a more of a corporeal form, even for ghosts, right? If you're fighting ghosts, because here's the thing: if you're fighting ghosts and you're actually able to deal damage to it to a significant degree, one of the best descriptors is the fact that it is now starting to have trouble holding its form and its shape. At that point, I would then start to describe it's like, okay, if you've got some decent damage to it, it's looking like a little bit rough or beat up. I'd be like, it looks like it is having trouble kind of keeping its corporeal form. Like it almost looks like it's kind of flickering or almost dissipating at parts and points there. Even for like, oozes, I'm like, oozes also, same thing. It's like if you've done enough damage to an ooze of some sort,
it starts to lose its...
seems to start losing its mass. It seems to like its mass is drooping and kind of falling off to be inert on the ground. Like it seems to be like losing itself a bit. And it's looking kind of rough.
I think that's a good quality.
I agree. As well as the fact once more of like in regards to players going into difficult encounters, I can agree that I'm not necessarily against there being certain encounters where, once again, I wouldn't phrase it like they're designed to fail, but so much as they are encounters, yes, that are exceedingly difficult and should like almost like we can liken it to akin to something like a DC 30 check, right? A DC 30 check is basically like godlike success.
Yeah.
If you can pass that, like you basically do, but it's supposed to be set at a 30 because it's essentially for the vast majority of almost anything, it's almost basically supposed to be just about impossible. But you are so good that you are able to do it. And so in terms of encounters that are designed to be and again, not every encounter necessarily should or can be accomplished. There absolutely are some encounters where it's like it is almost impossible for you to succeed at this thing. And just because you roll a natural 20, as we've said before, does not automatically guarantee that you're going to succeed. Just like
20 on a skill check does not mean you automatically succeed.
Because it's like, again, what the point is, like my point being though, is that necessarily designed to fail, but in terms of like when you have an encounter, it's like they're facing an enemy that is vastly more. The encounter isn't necessarily to fight the enemy. The encounter is to survive and get away. That is the point of it. And that is why it's not designed to fail. You, in fact, maybe even put specific things or contingencies in place to help them escape, to succeed what the intention and point of the encounter is, to succeed. Now, that's the point being, is like people need to get out of their mind that an encounter is not always just to kill and defeat whatever's in front of you. The encounter is something that, or even the intention or purpose of the encounter is something that you need to suss out as either a player and a character to be like, okay, yeah, what is the success? Like what is the actual purpose and the intent or the objective to succeed?
That's like one of my favorite kinds of encounters is encounters where you steal something or learn something you're not supposed to, and the encounter after that is to leave.
Get away. Like,
and so like some people will not play into that idea. Their idea is like, well, we hold strong, we can fight our way out of this.
We can just always fight our way out and win.
And the reality is that sometimes you can't.
No.
Not because you're not powerful, but because think of what would happen. Let's put it this way. You're trying to steal from a vault in Baldur's Gate. Like the vault in there. You steal something, you take it out. Someone catches you. Obviously, you're cloaked. They don't know who you are. But the moment that you have an extended combat with a group of guards, not only are they're gonna call more people who are magically inclined are gonna start showing up. The reality is that you now go from an incognito issue to a party. And no matter how much you cover yourselves up, if you are famous in any way, shape, or form,
oh yeah, they'll recognize you
behind a reasonable doubt. The same way that any character is allowed to make insight checks and perception checks is the same thing that these trained military professionals are allowed to do.
And not just that, but you also will be painting a target on your back.
Yeah, and so
for bounty hunters.
Yeah, not every solution is fight my way out. Some solutions are escape. And so that in essence is at that point, I feel it is very much part of the GM's job to convey as best as they can within reason the true objective and intention of this encounter. Like, again, basically being like, that is when I, as a GM, I will always be like, can I please get some insight or perception checks, please? Yeah. And at that point, like, because again, when looking at this character, like, unless they are deliberately designed to be more subtle and have subterfuge and even cloak or mask their true potential, I'm like, it's pretty easy for you guys to discern this motherfucker right here is not someone to necessarily take lightly. Okay, you all as well. You guys are experienced. You've done a lot of, so you've survived a lot of near-death encounters at this point. You can pretty much tell your instincts are slamming into you like red light. This guy is not someone to take lightly. Yeah.
And so it might behoove you to, whatever your objective is here, you got information, that's great. Maybe it's best for you to skedaddle the hell out of here now. Like, it's also a thing that they use in video games, a thing they use in all kinds of stories, where it's like, the objective is not to come and defeat that person right here, right now. You got the intel information to maybe help you later on to better deal with them at a different point. You are not equipped or in a position to really handle or engage them presently. Same thing, and like we can even reference Baldur's Gate 3, for instance, is like you go into, and it might be a little bit of spoilers for anybody who hasn't. So just if you don't want spoilers, you can go ahead and probably just mute this right now. But essentially, there is an enemy in Act 2 who is like immortal. Like they cannot be killed normally by anything. And you have to find a way to get around that particular immortality or invincibility to then harm them. Like, you cannot, and you encounter them in person at some point if you choose to. You can, before you've done this, and you could go and fight them right there and then if you really wanted to. But again, you have no way of doing that. you have no way of defeating them right then. And so that's not the point of that encounter. It's the same exact thing in almost anything. If you find a creature and you're a level 8 party and you're fighting like an ancient red dragon, odds are, even at level 8, you're not weak, but you certainly have a very low chance of being able to defeat that ancient red dragon, like, at any point, unless you have something else to help bolster your thing. And that's okay. Again, it's an important aspect, but once more, it is very much in the GM's prerogative and position and their responsibility is what I should be saying, excuse me, to be upfront with them in that way that is fair. Like, yeah, you don't have to immediately say, like, unless, of course, they are just being dogged and they are just being, like, kind of just ignorant or whatever. Like, again, they're doing a player thing. We're just like, no, I want to go kill it. It's like, all right, look. I'm literally going to break character real quick. Like, I'm going to break immersion real quick and say, like, this encounter was not designed for you to fight this thing. This will decimate you most likely, okay? You can still go and fight this thing if you want. I'm not going to say no, but you need to be aware of the consequences and what you're trying to do here, all right? Like, that is something, again, where it's like, if you as a GM have not maybe accurately been able to depict, like, yeah, you see this dragon as it is gargantuan in size, and it is known to have decimated and leveled cities, like, in villages, absolute waste.
I think it's
like
something to remind your players of.
Yeah, it's like, you are not always the biggest and baddest things around all the time. You are vulnerable. You do have things, and while I once more, I don't believe that a GM should ever fabricate or create an encounter that is designed to fail.
No.
I do believe that there are absolute encounters that it's like, okay, you have ways of getting away from this thing. There are rocky outcroppings to protect you, maybe from its sight or whatever. There are caves you can fly into that the dragon itself is too big and can't fit through to go after you. Yeah. There are, hell, I will even say at times in these moments, it's maybe okay to drop some Deus Ex Machina in there. Bring a character who can teleport, who kind of gets there, like an NPC who can then teleport them out of the way if things get really bad. Because once again, if players just roll crappy and then they die because of crappy rolls, that usually gives a bit of a sour taste in their mouth a lot.
Yeah, but that's also unfortunately
part of the game. It is, but also I also don't have a problem where it's like, hey, you're trying to tell a story, trying to have fun. And again, in the essence of having fun, if you feel like, okay, these players, and we've gone pretty wild, they've got attached to these characters. Like, maybe I shouldn't, allow the party to be party wiped completely in an encounter that I did design to basically be kind of not winnable in the sense of, like, killing the thing, where they are primarily vulnerable to this overwhelming force, and it's likely that they will die, even if they do the right thing in terms of, like, they ran away, they tried to they had clever decisions. Like, perhaps you shouldn't just let them die because you also set up this encounter that they couldn't defend themselves in. You have a responsibility then to not necessarily just wipe them out entirely, in my opinion. Because that then becomes a thing where it's just like, oh, as the GM, I have complete control. I can set up this whole thing, and then I just killed you guys. Like, it's literally just basically being like, yeah, rocks fall, everybody died. So, and it's
which is a perfectly acceptable cause if your party sucks. I will say this:
they would have to be really bad for that to be a justifiable thing.
Yeah, but it's a joke for a reason. I think
it is a meme. It's a meme.
Something that a DM could learn from is the fact that you might have some encounters that you thought of based on story, based on your writing, that are just not for your characters, and they might stumble upon them. You've tried every avenue to get them away from it, but that is what they want to focus on.
And you have to let them make their own mistakes and their own decisions.
You do.
It's absolutely true.
They get there and they go to fight, and it's not good.
No,
there's decimation.
That's the thing.
You start having like
a difference between players choosing this encounter or this situation, and them kind of, or you directing them to the situation for a purpose and a reason, and then things going shit.
I think there's
an important distinction between the two. It's like you have a responsibility for the latter, but your responsibility is stripped of you in the former. Again, if they choose to go into this thing and you've already given them everything within reason of, like, hey, this is what's up, and they still choose it, then at that point, literally the responsibility has been relinquished off of you. And you're like, all right, you're taking the responsibility. Cool. What happens now then. But if you're literally like in a situation where you're like, hey, you came here for this reason, but you've encountered this creature, this being, or whatever, this is what you need to be aware of here. And it's like, you know, I'm not gonna just drop this in on you and then kill you because, you know, because of bad rolls and because I wanted to again provide a certain narrative and a certain kind of effect to the campaign.
I think DMs forget how much information they can give their player characters.
Absolutely. Or they just choose not to.
Without ruining their story. There's the reality of if you're going to play in a 5e D&D campaign, there is a complete expectation that some of the players in your game
should have some insider knowledge to a certain extent. Their characters would know these things. They are directly connected in some way.
Especially if your big bad person or one of the people they can meet throughout that is very dangerous have something to do with why those characters are there.
The way they are has had some effect.
I look at
connection.
My first campaign, I was a barbarian that their main issue was vengeance upon chromatic dragons. They'd fought them before. They watched them decimate their people. So there is an innate knowledge on maybe how they work. And so any character can have, depending on their backstory, and this is for you DMs out there who don't like to give your characters the time of day, they can all have knowledge. And it's not based on a role. It's not based on a skill roll.
Not all.
There are enough like backgrounds, the backstory your players write for their characters,
your player's class or race. Even
there is an innate expectation of certain knowledge. You look at I'm going to use this as an example. Dwarves in 5e have stone cunning, right? They know about rocks, okay? Built rocks, not built rocks, half-built rocks, the ground. They just know about it. Now, certain DMs, some of your problematic DMs don't let you actually use that knowledge. Any decent DM, I think stone cunning is a good example of what a lot of races should know about. Tieflings should know a little bit about the hells, more so than your average human.
Than your average person was like.
Aasimar, unless they took the I don't remember anything backstory, they're gonna know
Celestials.
They're gonna know a little bit about the heavens, the Celestials.
Mount Celestia is
that whole area, even the planes of the gods, depending on if they're a religious sort and they used to be there and they're gone. You look at things like if I play a dark elf character and you're telling me I don't know what the Underdark is like, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
Because I do.
Or
that's where I was raised.
Whatever, you would just have common, not I would even say, for instance, elves, and because of their relationship with their patron god, Corellon Lorethian, they would also, and not even just that, but even we'll say elves might have a certain understanding of orc culture and things too, due to the fact that there is a very clear hatred and relationship between the two races and cultures, where it's you would know about how orcs probably operate and act because there is such a very integral, their gods are mortal enemies of the highest degree. They constantly have been attacking and interacting in terms of their environments and where they are. Your character as an elf would probably have, as well as with goblins, same thing, would have some understanding of these cultures and creatures and races.
I think it's an unreasonable part from a DM to look at a group of characters with all these different races and classes and all these different options,
all this
backgrounds, everything, and just be like, y'all don't know anything.
Yeah, you have to make a history check or make a religion check. And, you failed? You don't know anything about it. You know nothing about it.
Now, let's be real. There are certain things where a religion check or a history check or any of those checks would be worthwhile.
Yeah.
But the reality is, at least at the beginning of a game, there's a lot of things that, in my opinion, can just be
innate
basic knowledge.
Basic innate knowledge.
Because at the beginning of a campaign, you are moving around a preset or pre-written, ostensibly think RuneScape tutorial area.
Yeah.
Right? There's things you can come in contact with, but it's not nearly as dangerous. You're low level. You're starting to get your quests. There's things that you should know if you're here. Whether you've stayed in that town, whether you come from somewhere else, you ended up here, the reality is that no matter what background you have, what race you have, what your class is, there has to be something. You weren't born 20 minutes ago.
You weren't born yesterday. Like it's
Yeah.
you have some like again, like you said, unless you're like a literal freaking hermit or like
even then
an outlander, maybe.
Even then,
Like you would still have a certain knowledge of certain things for sure. Especially even with hermit, like you specifically have like an understanding of some kind of secret as well, which is like that's its own thing. But it's like you obviously maybe wouldn't be as knowledgeable about current events if you were a hermit or maybe an outlander, depending. Right, you wouldn't be as knowledgeable about like nobility or courtly
yeah. I mean,
politics.
Outlander might not understand a local government structure, but you know what they do understand? The tribal ways of the 6 other tribal races that live in the area.
No,
and
I
the
would
reality
agree.
is you look at
Or
like,
even have an understanding or concept of how tribal races function.
well,
And
they
maybe
were
a
most
lot
likely,
of the thing.
if they're an outlander, they most likely interacted with more than one, or they were a part of
Well,
one.
again, let's say that they had one specific kind of area that they were outlandering, right? And they
Yeah.
go to another one. They would still have some basic understanding and idea based off of comparisons from a vast multitude of other experiences, being like, okay, this is how they might act and interact. This might be how kind of their customs might work based off their environment and how they grew up and what happens. Like,
I think this is a great example for DMs before you start DMing, or if maybe you've tried to DM and people don't like it. There's this one really cool thing that I like to do when I do one shots or like a 5-session game is I tell them, a loose, like, hey, this is kind of what the story start is, so make a character for that. And they make a character. They come to the table. We do our first session, and before I do anything, I ask, like, well, what have you done before? To each character.
Who are you?
Who are you? And I get some info.
Okay.
And we start playing.
Your character might be then aware of this kind of thing.
My favorite question as a DM, and one that I ask as a player all the time, is I look at my DM and I go, well, this is my background. Would I know anything about this? Because it's very hard for a DM to take everyone's backstory and everyone's background
all the time,
everyone's race, and they just have it in their head all the time. It's not fair.
No.
So what I like to
is you should be able to apply
what I like to do as a character.
Know your character and actively apply the traits and aspects and features of your character. Ask,
say your background or your story or something blends into something you're currently dealing with. Say you're a sage, or you have dwarven stone cutting, or you're a scholar, or you're an outlander. Outlander's a great example of this. Outlander is someone who lives on the edges of society. And you know what isn't included in a normal, this is a feudal medieval society most times in 5e. You know who they don't include? People who live in tents. People who live out in the wilderness and they move around and they're nomadic.
The nomads, yeah. The
so
tribes, the hordes.
Orcs
are like
you're don't really have cities. You're a orc druid who's an outlander. You grew up in a tribe, and then the DM's bringing tribes into this, and you're like, well, can I know what they're about? And your DM goes, no.
You're not part of that tribe. You don't know anything about that.
Well, that's 100%. That's a big red flag.
It is.
Because you're like, we talk about.
It is a big red flag when your GM doesn't allow you to use anything of your character.
Yeah,
like if your GM literally says like, no, you can't do that. When you're just like, when you ask a question like, hey, my character has this thing. Can I try to apply that? It is almost always a big red flag if your GM usually just straight out says, no, you can't do that. usually, in my opinion, the hallmark of a great or a good GM is always like they will usually always be like, okay, well, tell like what does that say? Like, what does that feature say? What does that feature do? What does that spell do? Whatever. Like, really quick, just give me a bit of the details on what it's supposed to do, what it
Yeah,
says,
give
and
me a
then maybe
rundown.
and then maybe we can see if it can be applied. And that's what that kind of implies. Like, okay, what does it say? I don't really know if that would be as applicable for this specific thing, and that's okay. Or be like,
I'll
you know what? Yeah, I'll let you try for a role. Or you know what?
I'll
Maybe you would know this thing.
I'll give a good example. I had one shot I ran where there was like a cult, and the cult moved around. There were times where there was a point in their history where they ostensibly took over a outlander tribe, like a barbarian tribe. There were druids there, barbarians, things of that nature. Now, the nature of this cult is very secretive. So when I had a barbarian in my group who was an outlander, and he asked, he's like, "Well, would I know anything about this?" Now, the reality is I was like, "Well, roll a history check," and he rolled like a 16. It was a good check.
Yeah.
And I told him all the basic information about what he would have heard. The reality is that this tribe didn't allow outsiders in. So even if he was in the same vicinity, which I will accept as a traveling outlander, that your tribe could have definitely crossed paths with this one, no matter what in history we're talking about, I was okay with that. But what I told him were all of the outside information things he could gather. Even if he rolled well, there wouldn't have been anything else because I know for a fact that it's not like he joined this tribe. It's his tribe didn't fight this tribe. So all he would have reasonably been able to gather is surface information. But I gave all of it to him. Even if he had rolled a 12, I would have gave most of it to him. But the reality is like I want you to roll because I want you to feel good, but at the same time, you're at the same time that like we want these things to matter, they don't give you everything. So as much as we're like your DM should let you, your DM also doesn't have to give you every piece of
That's what I
information about
mean.
their
Like,
story.
and they can even specifically say again, like the fact the GM should always be willing to hear you out in terms of, especially if you are actively trying to apply your character's stuff. Again, any GM that's like, no, you can't do that, or no, this is not, and you're like, okay, well, when you ask again, the hallmark, again, in my opinion, of a good GM is like they will at least hear you out first. You know, they'll listen to it. They'll be like, okay. They'll play with the idea, but and be like, okay, what does it say? And then again, you read it out, and then if they specifically respond, it's like, I don't think that would have a real connection with this right here.
My
That
my
is
favorite
fine.
thing is a DM should listen to what a player has to say, listen to their case, and then if it actually does align with what they're talking about, maybe they can give them a hint or two.
Yeah.
But if the player is trying to use something that, while in other situations be very helpful, but unfortunately might not be super helpful with this, you just kind of reaffirm what you've already said. And that's something that like when I first started playing, I hated. I hated that. But the reality is that not every skill check, not every background, not every character's role will actually move a part of a story forward.
It won't
And
always
I
be applicable, and that's okay.
and the bad DMs will shut you down.
Yeah.
The
They will
bad DMs
restrict you.
will shut
They
you
will
down and give
limit
you shit
things.
and make you feel bad for asking those questions. A good DM will at least listen to you,
They'll always
maybe
listen. They'll
maybe give
always
you
humor.
a hint.
Yeah.
But even if they shut you out and they say, unfortunately, your knowledge base isn't enough to know about this specifically,
Yeah.
they usually give you something.
They'll usually give you the baseline, just something that would make sense so that you again feel like you still receive something for your effort. In
Like,
essence, I think what we can say is good GMs, they will always want you to succeed. Good GMs will always want you to succeed, and they will do everything within reason to assist you in doing so, because that is the point. They want you to know. They want you to succeed. They want you to feel cool, powerful, badass, involved. They want to immerse you and get you involved. Bad GMs are usually
they shut
ones
you
that
down.
want to shut you down, limit you, restrict, and for reasons that aren't always fair or reasonable. Just because, again, on the preface of this is what they feel like is correct.
Yeah.
This is the right way to do it. No, this makes it interesting because it's harder. This is how D&D should be played. How I want you to play it.
I want to give like a nice example.
Well, I will say we probably have to unfortunately cut it short
at the moment
since it's getting close to time with that. But honestly, this might be a topic we can maybe come back to.
I think so. I think the thing I want to leave everyone with is you should feel good about what you're doing at a table.
Yes.
And no matter if it's a player or a DM or anyone present, if you don't feel good about what you're doing, there is something there. And I urge you to look into why you're feeling that way. And if you can't solve it as a person reasonably, then find somewhere else to be. Oh shit.
Bless you.
Sorry. But the reality is that stuff like this, people care. We all want to work with each other. And me and Adam, we've never played a game together except for like one couple sessions. But the reality is both of us have never played a game together. But if we did, we're already on the same page of working together. That's the reality. And not just between players, it's everyone at that table. Yeah. DM, players, even people who are like just hanging out to watch you play, because that's happened to me before. But everybody wants the same outcome of having a good time and furthering a story the way you want to. So if you feel slighted, if you feel uncomfortable, especially if you feel uncomfortable, leave. Find someone else. There's so many forums. There's so many groups you can talk to. Hell, talk to us.
Please, honestly, leave comments down in the in the description or not in the description, but in the video, like letting us know what are some of your encounters with some problematic things in your games.
If you have
what
questions,
are some ways that worked, some ways that didn't. If you have questions, if you want to talk, like we might even maybe start making a Discord for people to join if you're interested in that at all.
I think for us, the way we've experienced this is that we want everyone who comes into this to have a good time.
We want people to love this game as much as we do, and we want people to be able to have healthy, good experiences.
So,
but that in essence is, that's what we're all about.
That's
here
us for the day.
That's us. Thank you guys again for tuning in. We hope if you stayed that you enjoyed, and we'll check y'all next time when we get back down into the archive. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.